Once upon a time, there was an age of heroes. People wanted to become so strong that they could cut through the skies and shake the earth. There were many worthy soldiers, but only one had the chance to seize this power. His name was Yeopo Bong Son. He was the one who could get any girl. He was extremely strong and brave, courageous, and not afraid of opponents. But apparently something went wrong because the last decisive battle was lost. However, the story itself is not at all about defeats, but about victories and conquests, about someone who was not afraid of death and fought everyone who challenged him. He was truly a mighty and strong warrior. Taehyun slept for many years until he was awakened. It was completely unclear what was happening around. Suddenly arrows began to fly. Maybe it's all Taehyun's fault. What has he done? Many did not expect to see Sung Ryong alive. But no, his voice sounded. Archers appeared ahead. They started attacking Sung Ryong and Taehyun. And despite the fact that they tried to hide from them, the deadly arrows reached Taehyun. But apparently the situation turned out to be so critical that Taehyun's memory returned. Suddenly he remembered everything that had happened before, as if he had awakened from a long sleep. It turns out that one person wanted to hang Taehyun, but before that he told something really important. The memory itself was actively blocked. It's just that Taehyun couldn't remember what kind of person this was. However, he could be the one to blame for what happened to Home Young. But Taehyun decided that Sung Ryong came for him. The entire army was alarmed and began to worry about Taehyun. The enemies were close and in large numbers. A serious and bloody battle was clearly ahead. But Taehyun decided to take the brunt of the blow. A serious battle ensued. Taehyun resolutely led his warriors forward. The enemy leader was pushed back. Taehyun gave the command to attack. His eyes simply burned with anger. However, the attackers did not want to retreat and resolutely rushed into battle. There were quite a lot of them. Both sides were not afraid of death. They were armed, but the opponents had the advantage since there were clearly several times more of them. Their leader was a scary man with a broken nose. During the battle, he was wounded, but this was not enough. No one could be left alive. Sung Ryong gave the command to attack. Defeat was unacceptable. The enemy could not be pitied. One had to demonstrate all one's rage and strength. This was the only way to win this confrontation. People looked at the fearless Taehyun and were ready to follow him. In battle, he showed all his skill and talent. The opponents clearly did not expect that they would be given such a rebuff. They were panicked and confused. The battle was exhausting and required rest, but something was very disturbing to Taehyun. His body simply stopped obeying its owner. Taehyun can't find an explanation for this. Taehyun's people noticed that something was wrong with him and began to worry about the commander. It turns out that earlier Taehyun often woke up from dying in his sleep. But this time everything was for real. He was really dying, so he became pale and somehow different. How many warriors have already died, and how many are yet to die? Are their lives simply wasted and people won't remember their heroes? Chosun cried. She truly loved Taehyun and did not want to lose him, but sooner or later everyone leaves, everything ends, no matter how much we want it. The pain of separation cannot be expressed in words. Chosun felt guilty that she had ever left Taehyun, but she believes that she will meet him again. It may not be in this life, but a fateful meeting will definitely happen. All that remains is to wait for her. But it's not for nothing that they say that you can't escape fate. If it is written in the family to die, then so be it. And fate rarely gives you another chance. And if he gives it, then you definitely need to use it. Taehyun wanted another chance so much that heaven heard him. After a while, he woke up in a strange room. His body was covered in needles. At first, Taehyun thought he was having another dream. True, somewhat strange, but what doesn't happen in dreams? When he stood up, he noticed that there was someone else in the room. It was Sung Ryong. Taehyun wanted to hug Sung Ryong. The needles greatly interfered with this, so much so that when trying to hug Sung Ryong, Taehyun almost gouged out his eyes. Taehyun managed to get rid of the needles, but something was bothering him greatly. He began to ask Sung Ryong what really happened and how he was able to take him from there. Sung Ryong replied that it doesn't really matter now, but Taehyun has a job at the Kisang house. Taehyun did not like this proposal since he had long given up on the past, so he yelled at Sung Ryong. Then he was not only a ladies' man, but also a thief, but all the events took place 10 years ago. Taehyun began to remember that there was a garden in that place then, but then returned to the present time. It turns out that he was hit by poisoned arrows, but by some miracle his body survived. When Taehyun saw the other team members, he became really happy. It was difficult for him to believe that everything that was happening was not a dream. It was so amazing and unusual that he simply could not hold back his tears. When his comrades saw Taehyun crying, they were sincerely surprised, because this is not the kind of person who can shed tears. It was so unlike Taehyun. They even thought that the poison that had entered his body had such an effect on him. Or has he just gone crazy? Almost everyone noticed that Taehyun had become something different. He decided to start training the army, force people to take spears in their hands, which they did not expect at all. Many simply did not understand why all this was needed. Taehyun looked quite healthy on the outside, but people were only confused by the things he did. It was so unlike him. What especially struck people was that Taehyun allowed people to take all the loot for themselves. Of course, no one was against this, but only before Taehyun took everything for himself, and then amazing things happened. Taehyun said that he values everyone and he has some cunning plan. Previously, he always acted at random. People thought that he was not sincere and was not telling something. Maybe he's just delirious, and after the fight, he'll go to conquer women's hearts. Sung Ryong had one thought as he looked at the forest on the mountain. An incomprehensible noise was heard from there. He decided to check what was there, but to do this, he needed to climb to the top. It was impossible to do it that easily. He asked for a knife, and with its help began to climb up. When he climbed up, he realized that he was right. Enemies were waiting at the top. They made an ambush. Fortunately, Sung Ryong immediately got his bearings and gave the command to prepare for battle. He told the people to take their weapons and go up the hill. People were yearning for the battle, so they accepted the offer with joy. Finally, they will be able to stretch their bones. The opponents received a scolding from the boss. They disobeyed the order to sit quietly, which is why their lair was declassified. And they also received the command to prepare for battle. Their plans were simple, to take the opponents by surprise, but they failed because they gave themselves away. When Sung Ryong and the warriors climbed the hill, they came face to face with their opponents. They stood ready, but did not dare to start first. And the first thing they asked Sung Ryong was, why is he here? What does he need? Wealth or the head of a leader? Who is he? A soldier or a robber? I didn't particularly like the last question. Sung Ryong stomped his foot decisively, and a fight ensued. There was no way Taehyun could stand by and watch what was happening. He took his big axe, mounted his horse, and like a demon rushed into battle. The comrades did not expect this. They were pleasantly surprised by how strong Taehyun had become. Or maybe he was like this before. The unimaginable power forced the opponents to begin to retreat. They began to flee in panic. This made Taehyun very happy, because he did not plan for anyone to get hurt. And Taehyun again repeated the words that he was not ready to go at the enemy blindly, since he values every warrior. He still claimed he had a plan, but he never revealed which one. Pyeongchusan Castle looked impregnable, but only the guards guarding it did not treat their duties as they should. The soldiers were dozing at their post, which meant they could have missed something important. They noticed smoke in the distance, but they couldn't understand what it was. There were different versions, for example, that it was a collapse. They really didn't like what they saw and decided to report this to their superiors. Taehyun came to the lord of the castle for a reception. He described in detail what happened to him. The lord listened carefully to the report and the situation around him. He also thanked Taehyun for driving away the robbers. The lord decided to see what Taehyun had brought with him on the carts. He lifted the tarpaulin and was surprised to see real riches underneath. The cart was filled with precious items. Taehyun said that this is his prey, but he is ready to bring it as a gift. When evening came, Taehyun told his friends about how the meeting with the lord went. He was simply speechless. It turns out that this was his plan. Friends decided to celebrate this matter. First, eat deliciously and then get drunk. Walk, just walk. Meanwhile, the owner of the garden met with Sung Ryong and decided to find out more about those events and what happened to Yopo. He was told that several poisoned arrows hit him, but there was no need to worry since Yopo was completely healthy. And the owner of the garden was so worried about him. He also asked about gold. In addition, he was told that Taehyun left the Kisaeng house. But he was already aware of this story. He was more worried that Taehyun had changed a lot. The owner of the garden told what Taehyun used to be like. He always used violence and really wanted to get rich, and now he behaves completely differently. Sometimes he is cheerful and open, sometimes he is gloomy and silent. The owner of the garden thinks that Taehyun is hiding something. Maybe Sung Ryong knows something about this? These words angered Sung Ryong, because you can't slander someone just because someone began to behave differently. This is not a reason to doubt without evidence. If something was wrong, Sung Ryong said he could turn around and leave, but the teacher didn't want that. Sung Ryong returned to his people. He arrived just in time, as dishes with meat were laid on the tables and goblets of wine were placed. There was a lot of everything. The friends were just sorting out the plates and sitting down at the table. The first toast was given by Taehyun. He raised the cup for those who did not return from the battle. Without them, there would be no victory. The dead must always be remembered. They were brave and resilient. He also said that everyone can take the surviving uniform and use it as needed. This pleasantly surprised everyone. You need to make the most of any situation and take care of what you have. And to be more confident on the battlefield, you need to use tactics. Taehyun himself admitted that he became different, and he had a wonderful opportunity to atone for all his sins. He must use it. And the next toast was for those who returned alive, and he will not regret those who decide to go against Taehyun's friends and will immediately send them to the next world. Everyone happily supported this toast. And only Sung Ryong did not share the general joy and was very gloomy. He stood and peered into the distance, deep in thought about something. He was too tense. Every muscle in his body was taut like an arrow. One of the team members noticed this and began pestering him with questions. And then Sung Ryong just suggested a drink to relax. The day was too stressful and the body needed rest. Dae-soo threw out a mysterious phrase that a smart person could easily catch even the fastest deer. It was a saying, a smart and cunning person can do whatever he wants. Many did not understand what was meant. But Dae-soo explained that deer are first caught and then killed. Everyone was really tired after a hard day. Therefore, the best solution was rest. The morning started with training. Taehyun apparently had a good rest and decided to stretch his bones in the morning. He picked up his favorite weapon and issued a challenge. His axe was so sharp that it could easily cut a falling leaf. He demonstrated all his incredible skills and strength. His colleagues were pleasantly surprised. Taehyun drank with them for 5 yesterday, but today he turned out to be as fresh as a cucumber. They especially liked Taehyun's ability to handle weapons. This skill had to be learned. But Taehyun said that this is not enough. He needs to master 3 more types of weapons, although he doesn't know where to get them. However, the thoughts were interrupted by the appearance of one of his comrades. He said he came with urgent news. Taehyun urgently needs to run to the barracks. The case concerns Sung Ryong. While Taehyun was resting, guards entered the castle. Taehyun didn't like what he heard very much. He got really angry and said that he would go for revenge. The owner of the garden thanked Yopo for coming and offered him a cup of tea. Taehyun refused the offer as there were more important things to do. The owner of the garden stopped him and asked what happened. Why did Taehyun injure his own people? He replied that they insulted him and generally caused a number of problems. The owner of the garden decided that Taehyun had simply gone crazy, since he had nothing to answer the accusations with. And in general, he lost the remnants of his dignity. But the teacher called not to scold, but for something truly important. There really were more important things to do. The teacher asked if Ti-hang knew Laoyang's archenemy. He was a kid who was always a nuisance. Since Taehyun knows him, the teacher asked him to give something to this man. Yes, usually such orders were carried out by messengers, but it was not so simple. That's why they asked Taehyun for an important task. They said that this boy knew how to use a bow very well, and those who tried to recruit him were immediately killed. That's why Taehyun is needed to try to recruit this kid. After all, if he were on their side, it would be wonderful. And to recruit, you have to go to enemy territory. If they complete the task, Taehyun and his men will receive an excellent reward. Probably Taehyun especially liked the last words, since he gave the command to set off tomorrow. But for this, he needs horses and provisions. He was confident that he would cope with the task. Taehyun told his people about the assignment, and they set out the next morning. Since his men were constantly making noise, Taehyun began to doubt that he could cope with the enemy. He was anxious to find out if he could do it. After all, those who had already tried to recruit the boy were killed. The travelers drove along the road until they saw 3 robbers. They shouted to them that if Taehyun and his people did not want to die, then they would have to part with everything valuable, and they took out weapons. However, they did not expect what would happen next. Taehyun raised his axe and, like a demon, rushed on a horse towards his enemies. It was truly a terrible sight. The opponents were shocked that there was some daredevil who decided to attack alone, and they were simply taken aback by this. And then they decided to retreat, since they clearly did not like the sight they saw. They thought that Taehyun was not right in the head, but they didn't have time, since Taehyun was more agile and quickly dealt with his opponents. His allies did not understand who it was and why they decided to attack. The robbers did not have anything valuable with them, but they didn't have to relax for long. One of Taehyun's men noticed something in the distance. At first he thought that it was just his imagination, since the movements were almost silent. But then an arrow flew at Taehyun. Thanks to his skill, he managed to intercept her. Finally, they found the one they were looking for. He stood on the hill and could not believe his eyes that the arrows had not reached their target. Maybe people are just lucky. But luck is luck, and you still need to destroy the enemy. Only Taehyun and the people disappeared from sight. However, he noticed some movement below and realized that they were coming at him for a breach. There is nowhere to retreat. We'll have to fight. Then he raised his crossbow and pulled 3 arrows at once. But the opponents moved with simply amazing speed. It turned out to be impossible to aim at them. This unpleasantly struck the archer because this was the first time he had encountered something like this. When he finally managed to concentrate and take aim, the enemy suddenly appeared nearby. Taehyun said that he may be a first-class archer, but in close combat he is easy to deal with. Taehyun swung his axe and struck it at the hill on which the archer stood. The ground began to crack and fall. Obviously no one expected this, because until now no one could cope with the archer. The enemy was simply in shock and eventually lost consciousness. When he woke up, at first he did not understand where he was and what had happened. He opened his eyes slightly and saw Taehyun with people who were talking to each other about something. They were deciding how to move the guy. Taehyun's people began to say that they were not porters, and then Taehyun decided to do everything himself. They noticed that the guy had woken up and asked if he was okay. The archer did not understand who these people were and what was happening. What are they planning? What do they ultimately want to do with it? Questions poured out of the archer as if from a cornucopia. Taehyun decided to explain the situation. He said that in front of him was a stupid guy who decided to turn the art of shooting into an empty phrase, and blood-stained arrows don't make him great. These words outraged, because many people had already been killed with a bow. But who were they? Innocent souls, poor people. The words spoken made me think. After all, there really is no courage in such actions, and there is nothing to be proud of. To have such talent, engage in robbery and not be ashamed of it? How so? Taehyun shouted these words. The young man said that Taehyun was talking outright nonsense, since he knew nothing. He said that he had no place to sleep, he was starving and could not do anything about it all. Fate simply left no choice in who to be. Taehyun gave a whole lecture about how if people had a choice, they would never become thieves. And he decided to show his strength. With one hand, he lifted the horse above his head, as if it were an ordinary piece of fluff. And then he said that the guy would go with them, and he need not be afraid that he will lose his self. Taehyun will take care of everything. He also added that he was giving it another chance. Taehyun and his men fight real villains, so they are not warriors, and they don't have time to play children's games. And then I thought about the boy's bow. Taehyun thought that he was somewhat similar to him, because he also wanted to use weapons to achieve something more meaningful. The next day, Taehyun returned to the castle with the people. Everything irritated him. He met with the overlord to convey important news. And then he thought that he didn't need awards. It's better to be free than tied to someone. So it's time to go back and start training newbies. And the beauty who left is also waiting for him. And then he heard a girl singing. How he missed this melody and did not expect to hear it at all in Loyang. He stopped and asked, "Is she from Hayden?" But apparently his question or manner of behavior frightened the beauty. At least she definitely looked scared. He said that she need not be afraid of him, and he is also from Hayden. The girl also happened to be from there, and she was born in Tavan. This made Taehyun happy. Just what is she doing here alone and at such a time? She asked Taehyun to read what was written on the flag. But Taehyun turned out to be illiterate. He is a commander, and he doesn't need any diploma. The girl laughed for a long time, so much so that tears appeared in her eyes. And then she added, "In order to keep everything in your hands, you need to at least know the basics of literacy." Taehyun thought that he should learn to read and write, because without this there is little that can be done. The girl decided to teach Taehyun and listed the basic knowledge that will help create herself. This is calligraphy, poetry, ancient scripture, etiquette. It turns out she even wrote her own book. Since she is so smart, Taehyun decided to ask her a question regarding who he serves. He said that this is neither a man nor a woman, but is waiting in line to get as much wealth as possible. From the description, the girl realized that we were talking about Governor Cho Gong-yang, and she turned out to be right. Her insight surprised Taehyun. How can you be so smart? But she lived in Hayden. According to the legend, 10 people should become eunuchs and occupy high positions. Therefore, one among 10, Chang Yang, Kang Seok, Jo Jun, and she thought it was the latter. Why exactly about him? Kang Seok has long established contact with the governor, and Chang Yang won't even notice that it's not the governor who is conducting the meeting. Therefore, it is Cho Jun who is the deputy. And they gave up their fortune because of the famous scientist Cheon. It was he who rebelled against this order, and was able to subjugate almost all political power. However, he was slandered and sent into exile, and later they made every effort to make people forget about him. But all the measures did not help satisfy the order of 10 eunuchs. Therefore, we need to get rid of anyone who can spoil the name of the governor. It's just strange why it was not Kang Seok who became the main one, but Cho Jun. He is very reminiscent of a raccoon when he's trying to figure out something unknown. Taehyun didn't expect that such a young girl could be so smart. This was a pleasant discovery for him. He wanted to know her name, but she did not answer. Taehyun looked at her carefully and noticed a striking resemblance. It was just essentially the same face, and that scared him a little. The girl noticed that something was wrong with Taehyun, but he did not answer the reasons for the change in mood. Taehyun offered the girl payment for her kindness, only she has nothing. Taehyun decided to leave. This upset her somewhat, and she asked if they would meet again. Taehyun replied, perhaps, if fate so dictates. The girl thanked Taehyun from the bottom of her heart for spending time with her. And when he left, I was very upset. She stood and followed him with a look filled with sadness. Two strangers watched this entire touching scene. These were robbers. They grabbed the girl when Taehyun left. She begged for help, fought back, but they did not listen to her, since they had their own plans for the beauty. They wanted to sell her into slavery. After all, old people like young bodies so much. But they didn't take one thing into account. The girl was not going to put up with this state of affairs and severely bit one of the men. But that didn't stop them. After all, if you wait a few years, the price for it will increase many times. The man hit her hard. At that moment, Taehyun appeared and called out to him. He was taken aback. No one had ever spoken to him so impudently. He started shouting, "Do you know who I am?" But Taehyun didn't care at all about it. He grabbed him by the hair, then swung his hand and began to beat him. The man screamed and asked for help, but everything was useless. Taehyun didn't hear anything. He saw an enemy that needed to be destroyed. The girl thanked her savior. If not for him, her fate could have been sad. He really showed up on time. She decided to find out his name, so that later, if possible, she could thank him for his kindness. He replied that his name was Yopo Ponson, and that he was from Owon. And if a girl wants to repay the rescue, she can simply sing a song. She was very surprised by this request. He asked her to perform what she sang yesterday if they suddenly met again. She replied that she would be looking forward to meeting again with great impatience. Taehyun gave parting instructions for her to be careful and not get sick in the future. They shook hands tightly. This meeting was observed by Taehyun's associates. They noticed how he looked at the girl and decided that he simply fell in love. Taehyun met again with the ruler and owner of the garden. The first said that Taehyun had come a long way, which included eradicating size theft and fulfilling his request. He fulfilled his duty in full, so he deserved a reward. He called the owner of the garden and asked, what reward should Bongsun be given? He replied that for completing an important task and other merits, Tanya would be suitable as a good reward. This is a special predatory animal that is capable of exterminating evil. Tanya is the guardian of the demigods and sages. Those who had a flag with the image of Tanya became revered and respected people. Many felt that Taehyun was not worthy of such a reward and honor. He always hid his stolen treasures, so giving him Tanya was an unwise decision. However, the ruler did not think so. He said that Taehyun is worthy of Tanya, and his friends can taste the meat and drink, and everyone who is against this decision must say so personally. Taehyun himself was surprised by this decision because he remembered what he was like in the past and realized that he was clearly not ideal. The Lord believed that not a single warrior had yet achieved such success as Yopo, and those who feel injustice must go and accomplish at least one feat. And if someone can achieve what Yopo does, he will be rewarded accordingly. Everyone agreed with this. When the master was left alone with the teacher, he said that Yopo would still be useful to him, so he needed to do it this way and not otherwise. However, Taehyun did not leave, and after a while he approached the teacher to talk. The teacher noted that Taehyun had really changed since his last mission. Previously, when he received the award, he behaved completely differently. But what Taehyun said surprised the teacher very much. He asked for another reward. He said that the prize should not be eaten. Using it instead of a weapon won't work either. And if he just runs around with a flag, then those who see it will not understand. It would be better if they gave Tanya weapons, or at least treasures instead. The teacher raised his voice at Taehyun and called him just a fool. Taehyun essentially doesn't know what his reward means. It turns out that Tanya is not just a reward, but a special status for the army. And Taehyun can't even imagine how much the teacher had to do to receive this award. Then the teacher remembered the proverb, Why does a pig need a pearl necklace and sent Taehyun home? He asked for forgiveness. As soon as Yopo received Tanya, amazing changes happened to him. Song Ryong, Vyal, experienced senior warriors, began to command the detachments. They also received valuable swords and fast horses. Yopo began to create a new order in his army, and those who heard about him and Tanya themselves wanted to get into his service. Now Yopo, who has become the owner of Tanya, has become the main person for discussion. After a while, the teacher called Yopo to his place. He said that Yopo's transformations were going very well and gave the command to take people and go north. Yopo had been waiting for this order for so long that he could not hide his joy. Finally, he was given this task. Taehyun had to face the northern barbarians, the peoples living in the north. He began asking questions about the upcoming operation. The teacher said they just needed to be careful. Taehyun decided to clarify what this means. The teacher said that he and his people would have to settle in Tessen and carefully study the fortress. Particular caution must be exercised on the border with barbarians and efforts must be made to prevent their raids. In other words, you just need to carry out the order without doing anything on your own. Taehyun said that someone else could be sent for such a simple task. The teacher explained why this mission should be carried out by Taehyun. The fact is that black mountaineers were spotted near the Hogan checkpoint in Pyeongjo. As soon as this became known to the ruler, he immediately ordered an army to be gathered. And that's why it is Taehyun who is sent to this case. The terrain in the Hogan area is very mountainous. With such terrain, it is difficult to use the strength of cavalry. Taehyun thought that there was unrest everywhere at this time. There are robbers and thieves everywhere. Corrupt eunuchs beg residents for pennies. And moreover, the barbarians decided to violate state borders. You need to be calm. Taehyun assured that the teacher need not worry, and he would carry out the order as it should. The teacher thanked Taehyun for his understanding and gave him a scroll with him. This was an appeal to the high-ranking officials of Anmun and Chongyang, expressing help for reinforcements. The letter had to be delivered along the way. It was also necessary to stop in Unjong and notify about it. Taehyun shouted, "If it's about Unjong, then it's about Changyang." Changyang was the commander who made great efforts to hold back the enemies and establish control over Pyeongjo. He managed to prepare the warriors well. Under his command were young soldiers from Ovon. He led them on the offensive. In Pyeongjo, he was respectfully called Master Chan. Additionally, Yopo was under Chongyang's command at that time, and he was always on Yopo's side, and he respected and trusted him. He believed in Yopo until the end when others turned their backs on him. Taehyun couldn't even imagine that he would be able to meet Changyang again. Therefore, he will set off immediately. After talking with the teacher, Taehyun asked Wee Yol how big the army is now. He replied, taking into account how many people joined them along the way, then no more than 500 people. Taehyun was pleasantly surprised that there were more people, but since no one knew how to read and write, he couldn't record it. Taehyun wondered, how many more people have there become? It is unlikely that there will be 500 of them. Sung Ryong replied that they had previously managed without it, and everything was fine. But Taehyun said, since now this is not just a detachment but a whole army, it is important that there is someone who knows how to read and write. Sung Ryong said that you can ask Master Chan, find out how many warriors he has. Maybe there are educated people in his army and he can single out one person. Taehyun replied that this is a brilliant idea and we need to implement it. Therefore Taehyun will go to Unjong first. He asked Hong-oh to look after Hwageuk. Sung Ryong decided that Taehyun just decided to leave everything on them and blame it on them. The matter is not so urgent. But Taehyun was one of those people who, once he made a decision, would not go back on it. And any important thing needs to be done in advance. In the meantime, Sung Ryong will be in charge. And Taehyun rode on his horse under the cover of darkness on the road. Meanwhile, the robbers attacked the young man because they thought that he had money with him. But instead of them, they found only many books. In fact, the entire bag was filled with them. They started asking where he was going with them. He replied that he wanted to be a warrior in Tanya's army. They remembered that their commander was Yeopo, who was the craziest in Pyeongjo. Some people called it that, Pyeongjo's biggest mistake. There were rumors about him that Yeopo always carefully hides his loot, loves to drink and have fun with girls. However, while they were talking, Taehyun quietly approached them. They didn't expect this and asked, "Who is he? Do you really have nothing to do?" Taehyun replied that of course he had a lot to do, but then he heard his name. How can idiots who didn't even hear the clatter of hooves stand and throw mud at him? They thought that the stranger was simply talking nonsense and began to drive him away. But Taehyun was not one of those people. He raised his fist and punched his opponent. He fell immediately. And Taehyun, as if nothing had happened, continued and began to apologize for interrupting them at the most interesting point. But there is no justification for theft. Opponents began to ask him to stop. They asked who he is. Taehyun replied that he was Pyongjo's biggest mistake. His eyes burned with fire like a wild animal. He, like a predator, began to attack. Opponents fell to their knees in fear and bowed their heads. And Taehyun, as if nothing had happened, continued the conversation. He asked why they, the robbers, needed weapons. He called them frail, as if they didn't eat porridge in the morning, and asked which of them was in charge. What idiot decided to gather such idiots and send them to fight? Maybe he won't stand on ceremony with them and finish them off. And if they catch your eye again, they will have a hard time. But then another participant in the action appeared and asked Taehyun who he was. How dare he touch his people, who are completely harmless? This man was the chief among the robbers. He was tall and muscular, and on his shoulders dangled a bear carcass. He was very scary, and his screams simply shook the earth. Taehyun looked carefully at the giant, and was surprised to realize that he had already seen him somewhere. But where? However, before he remembered who was in front of him, a powerful blow to the jaw turned off his consciousness. Even in the most difficult battle, his presence could work wonders. The warriors stopped being afraid and worried. He was given the nickname Ham Jin Young, but in fact his name was Guo Song. He was the commander-in-chief. He had the right to command the entire army and was excellent in the art of combat. At the same time, he always gladly gave instructions and gave advice. But still, there was someone who never listened to him. Despite this, Guo Song was always loyal to those who did not deserve it. And that fool was Taehyun himself. However, it was an honor for him to stay with Guo Song until the very end. Incredibly, as soon as Taehyun drew the image of Go Sun in his memory, he immediately remembered this face. The giant raised his fist to hit Taehyun, but he intercepted his hand and hit back. The longer Taehyun looked at the giant, the clearer the image became. There were no scars on his face yet. However, he definitely deserved this blow. Taehyun hit him right in the nose, causing blood to flow. The giant covered his nose with his hand to stop the bleeding. How similar he is to him, same eye shape. It would be necessary to find out exactly who is in front of him. Taehyun shouted that he almost didn't touch him and there was no point in pretending, and if he decided to fight with him, then such an attack is clearly not suitable and called the thug to fight. He roared that if the stranger wanted it that way, he would kill him right away, and he prepared to strike. Taehyun kept thinking that this thug was very reminiscent of Go Sun. He even has the same endurance. Taehyun was looking forward to what would happen next. He really wanted to stretch his bones. He prepared to repel the attack. The men clashed in a fight. The air trembled with the ringing of fists. Sparks were flying around them. However, the enemy turned out to be very strong. Taehyun could not overcome it. They rushed at each other like wild animals. But Taehyun had youth and skill on his side. Therefore, he was able to deliver the decisive accurate blow and was very pleased with the result. Seeing the incredible strength and power of the enemy, Taehyun was even more convinced that this was none other than Go Sun. The latter admitted that he underestimated Taehyun, but he didn't want to back down. The brute roared that he would now give it his all. He completed the Gungap training and showed off his muscles of steel. A mortal fight began. The men twirled as if in a frantic dance. Both were extremely strong. But then Taehyun's appearance changed too much. He began to resemble a devil with burning eyes. He grabbed the thug by the arm and began to twist it. Despite the fact that the giant was very strong, he could not withstand this hellish pain. They shouted, "Enough, I give up, stop." But that didn't stop Taehyun. He said he wasn't finished yet. The giant again asked for mercy. Taehyun said that he would spare him only on the condition that he give his name. The brute said that his name was Guo Song. Taehyun was right. In front of him is Guo Song himself. He gave him advice. Quit what he started and join his army. This sentence surprised Guo Song, but he accepted it. In fact, he had nowhere to go. It's dusk. Taehyun and the people cooked the bear carcass and enjoyed the food. It was a great meal, and everyone was finally able to eat their fill. But not everyone was happy about the changes that had taken place. Go Sun's people believed that Taehyun could only ruin their lives. Taehyun asked them, "Did you steal for the first time today?" This question almost made them choke. He said that stealing is like standing on the edge of a cliff. It only takes one wrong step to fall into the abyss. He also invited them to follow him, and then Taehyun promised that he would forget about today. People did not expect such an offer. They looked at Taehyun with hope because he could change their lives. He asked if there was anyone among them who knew how to read and write. One said that he knew a little about literacy and really asked to take him in with him. Taehyun was not against such a replenishment and said that he would try to do everything possible. Changyan's army galloped across the mountainous terrain. 3 people appeared on the road ahead, blocking the path. They asked to stop the troops. The leader asked who they were and how they dared to block the path of Changyan's army. The unknown people replied that they had come to convey the words of Chol Tal from the great army of Hwang Dai-in. They reported that the troops of Oh Hwan's army were going to attack the general, and they urgently needed to withdraw the troops. There is no other way out. There were rumors that Hyun-go of Ho-Owan Gyo-wi had secret relations with Oh Hwan's army. Maybe they heard something about it? The commander doubted that the message from Chol Tal was true. He needs evidence to support this information. One of the warriors blocking the path said that he would introduce himself again and took off his hood. It turned out to be a girl. She said that she was the daughter of Chol Tal from the great army of Oh Hwang Dai-in, and her name is Koki. Everything she said was true information. She said that she was fulfilling the duty assigned to her, so she would tell everything as it really is. However, the general took out a sword and put it to the girl's neck. He said that she was making a lot of noise. He will not believe the one he sees for the first time, and will not turn his troops. Koki replied that she would close her eyes to this incident, but insistently asked to get out of the way. The general and his people moved on. Kohi took off her headdress and threw it on the ground. She understood that the situation was critical, so she ordered an emergency message to be sent to the nearest village. Danger threatened everyone, Changyan, Songak, and others. Perhaps the armies will take it and simply raze it to the ground if nothing is done. Taehyun once again asked the new guy if he knew how to read and write. The young man confirmed that this was so. Moreover, he can not only read but also write. He read the Torah from the Pentateuch. He is well versed in Pekahaki. He really liked Chongyun's ideology and even had plans to go on a propaganda trip. Taehyun asked what the Pentateuch and Chonghae were. For him, these words meant absolutely nothing. The man replied that he wanted to become a copycat, but I changed my mind because of what I saw in Pyeongjo. Taehyun asked him to stop, as he already received a lot of information that was incomprehensible to him. Since the army needed someone who could read and write, Taehyun graciously allowed the young man to become a military official in his army. The guy didn't even expect that he would have such an honor and thanked him from the bottom of his heart. Taehyun asked what the name of the new army member was. He replied that his name was Jin Yirok. When Taehyun heard this name, he was surprised because it was familiar to him. He knew a man who bore this name. Jin Yirok looked questioningly at the general. Taehyun looked carefully at this face again and realized that he was mistaken. He just came across another person with the same name. Taehyun said that it was time to rest, since he would have to meet with the warriors in the morning. Taehyun was still tormented by doubts that suddenly Jin Yuirok was the one he knew before. After all, Guosong was also a person from the past. He watched as Guosong talked to Jin Yuirok. They sat by the fire and warmed themselves, talking peacefully. The next morning, Taehyun returned to his warriors. Sung Ryong was informed about this. He immediately rushed to him. Taehyun had his back to him. Sung Ryong said that a young man wearing a habak came with urgent news, but no one was sure of their veracity, so the young man was captured. Taehyun started asking about the situation and asked where the prisoner was. Taehyun went to see the prisoner, but realized that he was speaking a completely different language. Nobody could understand what he was saying. One thing was clear. There was a messenger in front of them. Alas, there was no one in the army who could understand Oh Hwan's conversation. The prisoner began to say that he was serving with Chol Tal from the great army of Hwang Dai-in. He was entrusted with important news. The man asked to untie him, since standing with his hands tied was extremely inconvenient. Sung Ryong asked Taehyun if he understood this conversation, and who came with him this time. Sung Ryong looked at Go-sun and didn't understand who it was. He introduced himself and said that when he was little, his father and Oh Hwan were engaged in smuggling, so he understands this dialect a little. The prisoner shouted that Oh Hwan's army was going to capture Sanggun, the ambassador. The troops are said to be heading towards a great army, and again he asked to untie him. Sung Ryong asked again, did he understand what he heard correctly? It was clear from his face that some important thought had come to mind. Taehyun asked, maybe he knows something about this? And then he himself continued that, when he arrived there were various rumors about the appointment of Master Chan. There is a version that he went on orders to the great army. He was given orders to ensure the safety of the ambassador. The warriors of the great army were always friendly with them. However, when the colonies of Yeodong, Yeso, and Ubukpyeong were created, their good attitude changed. Now they began to hate. Why did they come now? What is the reason? and even if they decide, they will first have to overcome the Great Wall. But Guosong suggested that it could have collapsed long ago and they still hadn't received their well-deserved rewards for a long time. In addition, it is known that they have long had close ties with the warriors of O Huan. Local residents should definitely know about this. Guosong asked how big this army is. The prisoner guessed that there were about 3,000 people in it. Taehyun said that we urgently need to hit the road. Sung Ryong tried to stop him and said that if troops move without orders, then this is tantamount to committing a serious crime. But Taehyun was not one of those who was willing to sit silently with folded arms. He shouted to Sung Ryong that he was also the commander. He was worried and wanted to weigh everything first and not act at random, because this would only bring problems in the future. Taehyun clenched his hand into a fist to control himself and began to remember. When the Chavi fortress was captured, the general saved him. He came and extended a helping hand. From that moment on, these experiences appeared. Taehyun told Sung Ryong that they would still go there, and he ordered the soldiers to be told that only those who want to save Master Chan can go with them. All responsibility, if anything, will lie with Taehyun himself. There was an intense battle going on. People withstood the onslaught of the army, which was approximately 10 times larger in number, for half a day. But it couldn't go on like this for long. We should end this. The general felt overly tired, because the confrontation had indeed been too long. He barely had the strength to hold the sword in his hands, but he gave the command to his warriors to move forward so that the enemy did not take a break. This was the only way to end this battle. The Yoso army under Cheon Inchan was in turmoil. The general shouted at the soldiers that they had been fighting for so long, and now they could not cope with several hundred idiots. He was informed that the losses amounted to about half the army, and Chang Yang was too tired. But the general decided to deal with everything himself. He jumped on his horse and rushed forward, waving his sword. Confusion also reigned in the enemy camp. The general was informed that there were no more reinforcements, and they asked what to do in this case. Retreat? But he is not one of those who is ready to retreat so easily. It is necessary to collect all the wounded from the field and move them to a safe place. You should also check how well the weapon is, and you need to be ready for battle. However, people understood that this was the end. There was no more strength to fight. Many were mortally wounded. Perhaps the commands were issued incorrectly. One of the commanders said that the blame rested entirely with him. He said an unforgivable mistake had been made. When one of O Huan's men was in their hands, no one listened carefully. Now is not the time to die, otherwise the whole of Pyeongjo will immediately know about it. They managed to buy time. Among the dead were not those who crossed the border. The wounded man said that he was grateful to the general for this great battle, and he's still with him. It was a great honor for him. As the general bent over him, alarming information came again. The enemy was continuing to advance. The general behaved as a commander-in-chief should. He shouted that his warriors were the real wolves of Pyeongjo, who were ready to pursue their prey to the end. And if they show weakness to the enemy, they themselves will become prey. And if they are destined to die, then they need to do it with dignity, as befits real warriors. He ordered the people to start hunting. The warriors drew their swords and prepared for battle. The attackers thought they were easy prey. Their commander drew his sword and pointed it towards Taehyun's men. He shouted offensive words at them. There is no need to be embarrassed, because they want to quickly become corpses. But apparently he had not heard anything about Taehyun and his comrades, otherwise he would have been extremely careful with them. Swords flashed in the air. Blood splashes were visible everywhere. There was a difficult and bloody battle for life and death. The general later said that on that day many good fighters were gone, and that was the whole tragedy, because the best fell on the battlefield. And despite the fact that they stood together until the very end, the time has come to bring justice. An arrow flew towards the general. This was the experienced archer whom Taehyun took into his service. Taehyun told Sung Ryong and Wee Yeol that he was going there himself. They didn't even argue with him. Taehyun jumped on his horse, raised his hand with a spear, and gave the order to advance. The opponents did not expect reinforcements to appear. This came as an unpleasant surprise for them. The general looked at Taehyun and realized that he had already seen him somewhere before. Could this really be Yopo himself? After Taehyun gave the command to advance, his army rushed towards the enemy. They saw that their rivals were simply obsessed with battle, but they thought that they could cope with them due to their larger numbers. They decided that this matter needed to be ended. The general ordered those who remained to push out those who were coming towards them. Chang Yang was genuinely happy to see Yopo, but wondered how he knew his location. However, he believed that his appearance would not change anything, since it was too late. but he had no idea what frantic power lay hidden in Yopo. When Chang Yang noticed Sung Ryong and Wei Yul, he began to wonder how they ended up here. They said they received an emergency message from Chul Tal of Oh Huan's Grand Army. Thanks to this, Taehyun quickly gathered people and brought them here. However, Chang Yang needs to leave the battlefield as his safety comes first. While they were talking peacefully, a loud explosion was heard. It was Taehyun. He cut through the air, rapidly attacking enemies. His eyes burned with devilish fire. He was scary and very strong. The opponents expected anything, but did not think that they could meet such power. They asked each other, "What is this? What is happening?" But they didn't know the answer. They were simply confused because they thought that they could easily take the enemy in greatest numbers. Their commander shouted, "If you don't move forward, he personally—" But he didn't have time to finish this phrase as Taehyun struck with lightning speed. Taehyun looked with superiority at his opponents and saw that victory was clearly in his pocket. But first you need to destroy the enemy warlord in order to win and end it all. While Taehyun was pondering the situation, one of his men shouted, "General, look there!" He looked and saw the enemy commander on horseback. There was another person next to him. They chatted, discussing the current state of affairs. His companion said that there was nothing to worry about, since there were only a couple of hundred people in front of them. Taehyun turned to the enemy general. He called him and said that if he came up, he would finish him off right away. At the same time, he looked really scary, like a devil from hell. The general, surrounded by his retinue, felt completely safe. He was sure that in front of him was another puppy that could be easily dealt with. When one of his subordinates asked him to leave, the general completely refused and said that he himself would be happy to deal with this young man. He shouted to Taehyun, "Come here," and he was glad to hear such words. The two commanders were very strong. They fought long and tiresomely, but the preponderance of forces was clearly on Taehyun's side. He made a quick and clear blow, thanks to which the enemy's hand was severely damaged. The general, of course, did not expect such an outcome, but it turns out that this was not the end of the battle. Taehyun turned into a real red devil. He said that the general would quickly die from his hwagok. The general realized that he had lost this battle. He faced an enemy with whom it was simply impossible to cope. For him, it was a real shock and horror. He looked at Taehyun and did not understand what to do next in this situation. The only thing left is to try to get out of here, but how to do this? We need to find a way to get rid of it. But then he heard a sound next to him. He turned around to see what was happening, and it was Guosong cutting through the air. He simply knocked the horse down, and the general fell with it. The latter stopped understanding anything at all. On one side is Taehyun, on the other is Go-sun, and both resembled death machines. This is the last thing the general had time to think, since Taehyun simply cut off his head with the powerful hwagok. He immediately told the general's men about this and called on them to surrender. They stood simply in horror. The general's men were in panic. One of the main ones said that what happened was simply impossible. They were in some confusion. Taehyun, without thinking twice, decided that it was time to put an end to them, since they were clearly not going to give up. The opponents were ordered to retreat from the flank. But Taehyun apparently decided to help them speed up, and to do this, he ordered his men to simply push the enemies out of the battlefield. Having sipped unsalted, they left this battle. It's dusk. Chang Yang was seriously injured. He was carried from the battlefield and laid in a hut. Taehyun was worried about him, so he immediately asked Go-sun about Chang Yang's health. Guosong reported that he was fine, but more accurate information could only be obtained after they arrived in Uncheong. While they were talking, Song Ryong entered the hut and said that a messenger had arrived with urgent news. The messenger turned out to be a beautiful girl. She was taken to Taehyun. She said that her name is Gu Kui, and she is the daughter of Wuguan Daigul Chiltal. She congratulated Taehyun on his victory. Taehyun also introduced himself in response, said his name was Yopo, and he was from Dango's group in Byeonsu. His mission was to rescue General Chang Yang, and everything worked out thanks to the news received in advance. Gu Kui said that it was only thanks to Yopo's army that war was avoided. Her father ordered her to come and thank and pay respects. But she has one question she would like answered. Taehyun was surprised and asked what kind of question this was. Gu Kui asked for the reason why Taehyun entered the battle with only a few soldiers. After all, there were much more opponents. Maybe he's just overly confident in himself or doesn't know how to make the right decisions. After this battle, they became debtors. But she is very interested in who Taehyun is, a smart general who can think sensibly while in the midst of events, or an ordinary idiot who could not cope with the situation. These words especially hurt Sung Ryong, who was also present at this meeting. He started shouting at Gu Kui and saying that at first she just burst into their tent, and now she's also calling her names. And only Taehyun was calm and calm. He replied that he did what he wanted. He is not someone who can get sick or die in battle, but he needed to cope with boredom. Gukui took these words for self-confidence. Taehyun did not deny this. He raised his palm and showed it to the girl, saying that he had the will of God. And even if several thousand or millions of opponents stand in his way, he will not be able to die until he completes the mission. He must finish what he started. There is no other way out. The words about the will of God made Gukui laugh very much. She stood next to the men and laughed heartily. She then said goodbye to them and said that she hoped to see them soon. Gukui also promised that next time she would definitely thank Taehyun for his bravery. In the meantime, let him be extremely careful. Sung Ryong decided to ask Go Sun if all Wuguang people behave like this. Guo Song replied that yes, they are very brave and determined, and this is not rude at all. While they were talking, Master Chang Yang woke up and sat down, and then began to laugh about the words Taehyun said about the will of God. He remembered that Yopo had hit himself in the face with a spear when he was young, and now he has grown up and become very arrogant. If a person jokes, then everything is fine with him. However, what Chang Yang said was not a joke at all. He remembered that story perfectly, as if it was just yesterday. The general greeted Sung Ryong and also wanted to thank Go Sung for saving him. The general was left alone with Yopo. He asked for permission to lead the army, and even if this is so, he may not worry. Chang Yang will write a letter to Master Dong. Taehyun thanked him and asked him to send a sealed scroll so that the master would understand the essence of what was happening. He hoped that he would understand the situation and understand that Taehyun only broke the rules in order to prevent a big disaster. What if they give him a special reward for this? The general thanked Taehyun from the bottom of his heart. They shook hands. The general said that it was only thanks to Yopo's courage that his people remained alive. Yes, many were wounded, but alive. And now they can honor those who died in the war. The general asked where Taehyun heard about the will of God. Yopo even blushed at this question, which was completely unusual for him, but did not answer. And at this time, some guy started a real fight. He was young, strong, and resilient. They wanted to grab him, but he had no desire to fight one-on-one. He asked everyone to attack him at once. Early in the morning, as soon as Taehyun woke up, Sun Ryong burst into his tent screaming. Cho-hen realized that something very important had happened. Sung Ryong said that he had just received bad news from the guard. They were being attacked. Taehyun looked at him questioningly because he didn't understand who could dare to do such an action. How many soldiers arrived in Wuguan? What Sung Ryong said was a shock to Taehyun. Their guard was attacked by only one soldier, but what he was like. He was a fearless young man who was ready to fight against several at once in battle. He captured one of the soldiers, shouting that in Yuzhou it was a great sin to be a Gu soldier. He grabbed him by the neck and tried to strangle him. He needed to get through. Since things were bad, the guard called for reinforcements. Just think, just because of one child. Sung Ryong and Taehyun arrived at the scene and asked the soldiers, what were they doing? Taehyun saw a young man standing opposite. It was a loner. But he managed to stun the soldiers without using weapons, and this is already worthy of admiration. The young man noticed Taehyun and asked if he was the captain. He said that everything will not end just like that, so it's better to approach. Taehyun asked how old is he? But the young man could not answer this question because he simply did not know. Then Taehyun said that he looks a lot like Soldier Gu. Maybe he is Wuguang. The young man shook his head and replied that he could ask about this for as long as he could. The answer is no. Taehyun ordered his warriors to leave. Sung Ryong looked at him in surprise. Taehyun explained his decision this way. There are no enemies, so there is no one to fight, and the wounded must be carried away. The young man stood up, as if he wanted to fight. Taehyun explained that there was a battle with the Wuguan soldiers recently, so people were just tense and understandable. But at the same time, the young man also had to leave the field, but he was in no hurry to do this. Taehyun turned his back to him. The guy didn't understand what was happening. He tried to hit him, but Taehyun intercepted the movement with his foot. And then he picked up this child and abandoned him. The guy landed on all fours and asked Taehyun what he was doing. Not only does he beat up those who are defenseless, but he also doesn't apologize. Taehyun looked at him and said that this was a kind of retribution, because his people also suffered because of them. Then the young man jumped up and did a somersault. It was as if he was demonstrating what he was capable of. His movements were precise and really impressed Taehyun. He easily repelled his attacks, but was pleasantly delighted. Taehyun wondered what it was, natural talent or painstaking study. Most likely, he went through all possible types of training. However, he can't do everything, and he clearly has a lot more to learn. The battle was spectacular and colorful, but Taehyun won again. With a targeted blow, he blinded the guy so much that he grabbed his eyes. But the blow, in the opinion of Taehyun himself, was not too strong. Taehyun raised his hand to hit again, but the young man asked for mercy. Here's the strange thing. The guy was able to knock out more than one soldier, but now he's making faces. He screamed that Taehyun just saw his clothes and immediately jumped on his throat. Isn't it a sin to be a soldier in Yuzhou? He looked at Taehyun and said that he couldn't just hit him because it wasn't fair. But you can take up arms, and then the battle will be on equal terms. The young man asked to give him a spear so that he could fight the Yachiokian. Taehyun thought about this, and then asked one of his men, Chong Lian, for a spear. Yes, it was not a Yachiokian, but it was this weapon that was offered to the young man. Before the fight, Taehyun asked the guy to tell him his name. The young man replied that his name was Zhao Yun from Changshan, and raised his weapon. Zhao Yun asked Taehyun if he had a weapon. He replied that in order to cope with the child, he would not need it. In addition, he can give 3 chances. The battle has begun. Taehyun planned to win carefully, but plans changed somewhat. He asked Sung Ryung for another spear and gave it to the young man. He was truly delighted. It all ended with the guy's spear simply breaking in half. Sung Ryung was very saddened by this because this was his favorite weapon. The young man was defeated. He asked to be killed. He can no longer live because he lost the battle under the family name. Taehyun asked, "Are the people of Wuguan really that responsible?" But since the guy had already repeatedly repeated that he had nothing to do with the Wuguans, this question angered him. Sung Ryung remembered that the guy had previously said that he was from Sangasan, but Taehyun had never heard of this place. Sung Ryung said, "It is rumored that the Sangasan Zhao family is the best at wielding a spear." Taehyun thought about this information and noted that the young man's technique was indeed very good. Taehyun decided to find out how old the boy was, but since he asked the same questions, it irritated him greatly. He replied that he was born in the year of Kyungsul. Sung Ryung considered that he was only 16 years old. Taehyun continued to question the boy further. He wanted to get as much information about him as possible. He asked why he left home because he was still very young. The guy replied that he had no choice. Yes, he comes from a famous family, but she doesn't have much wealth or generals. That's why it happened. Taehyun decided that he simply abandoned his family. The guy said he didn't do it. He left to find a better future. He just wanted to make his parents happy. This was his plan, but it seems to have failed successfully. Taehyun did not understand these words and asked them to explain. The young man said that his group of thieves had already dealt with him. This means it's over. These words plunged Taehyun into a real rage. He shouted that his name was Yopo and that he was the commander-in-chief of Dangyo. These words struck the guy. Taehyun promised that in the Binzhou region, you can join the army from the age of 15. And then he even invited the young man to join his army in order to become successful. From the last words, the guy simply began to stutter. He expected anything from such an offer. He was surprised. Don't you have to be rich to become a general? There were chuckles in response to this question. Sung Ryung and Wee Yo looked at each other and said that one of them is Taehyun's right hand and the other is Taehyun's left. And both of them are from a butcher's family. But recently they were joined by a guy who was in a gang of thieves and had no wealth. They invited him to join their army, provided, of course, that he had certain abilities. The guy thought that they were just laughing at him, because there is no such army, but he was dissuaded that she was there in front of him. This is an original historical account. During the era of the Shu Kingdom under the reign of Liu Bei, one of the 5 tiger generals was Zhao Yun. He was a courageous man, to whom the saying fits, "There is only one warrior in the field." It was easy for him to appear during a battle so that his enemies would begin to respect him. He was considered one of the most ferocious generals. But the true story will begin when Taehyun is gone. Zhao Yun was asked what decision he made. The guy didn't think for a long time and replied that he was ready to serve Yopo as his commander. Meanwhile, a letter was brought to the lord of the castle, in which it was reported that Taehyun had violated military rules since he had advanced the army. This is unforgivable, and Yopo must be punished accordingly. The teacher noted that it was Taehyun who saved General Zhang Yang and his achievements deserved to be rewarded. Yopo began to learn to read and write. It cannot be said that he was a capable student. He tried to learn how to write letters, but often forgot that just one line could make a significant difference in meaning. Unfortunately for him, he came across a strict and demanding teacher who demanded that he rewrite the same word as many as 100 times. The teacher required Taehyun to write morning, noon, and evening. He says that problems with writing are due to incorrect pronunciation. He was happy to be distracted, just not to study. Therefore, when he was informed about the arrival of the courier, the letter immediately faded into the background. He went out to meet him and was told that a letter had arrived from Mr. Zhang Jas for General Yuo. Taehyun came forward and said that he was the very head of the army to whom this message was addressed. The courier said that he had heard a lot about the exploits of the general and that it was a great honor for him to be here. And he gave the letter. Taehyun unrolled the scroll and asked to have it read to him. The scroll said that since Commander-in-Chief Yuo Bonxiong advanced the army without orders from above and challenged the strict military command, he deserves punishment. But since he saved General Jian Yang, no one will talk about the crime he committed. This rescue was very important. His feat will be taken into account and the general will receive a reward. For assistance in defeating the Wuguan army, the overlord gives 20 bags of rice, a silver base, and the rank of government and defense officer as a reward. Of all the awards, Taehyun liked the new title because it meant the beginning of a successful career. But among other things, his duties will include carrying out courier orders for Fort Daisun. Taehyun was somewhat taken aback by the latter. The ruler noticed this and asked if everything was okay. Maybe the general considers this position too low for him. Taehyun assured that this was not so, but he can't even write his name properly, and becoming a messenger for the overlord is... He was convinced that there was no need to worry. His duties will include simple delivery of letters and nothing more. Taehyun said that in that case, he would be happy to take this position. The sovereign ordered meat and alcohol to be served to celebrate the occasion. He graciously offered to treat himself to some food, and then said that Taehyun could be free. When Taehyun went down the stairs, the overlord was watching him from above. When Yopo returned to his people, everyone began to congratulate him, and the first was the one who taught him to read and write. Taehyun said that now they can celebrate and it's not at all scary if they are a few days late to the people in Unjun, but the teacher cooled his ardor. He said that first Taehyun must write 1,000 times what was taught in the morning. Taehyun noted that last time the figure was much less than just 100, and why did he take it with him? In the evening, the ruler and owner of the garden drank tea. The owner of the garden asked what caused such a late visit. The lord apologized and said that there was nothing special. He just had a few questions and would like answers to them. The first thing he asked was why the owner of the garden always treats Yopo so warmly. Why does he want to see him in a higher position? He said that he had already given permission, but there were some doubts. Then the ruler asked, maybe he just doesn't trust him completely. And he continued that Yopo was never stupid. And now, perhaps, he has become even better. Then the owner of the garden explained his position. People with power always chase high positions. General Hajin from the Yuju region got along well with Tak Ryu, but together with Sane, he created another gang. The same thing happened to the Gongsun family along with Wu Guan and Sionbi, and there are several such examples. Well, he is together with Chen Ryu and Tak Ryu. They live in very turbulent times. Even if a small amount of information falls into the wrong hands, a bloody war could break out. The Lord said it turns out since Taehyun is not literate, and if he is a messenger, then you don't have to worry about information leakage. Yes, that was one of the reasons. And the second was that Taehyun had previously been engaged in delivering letters and gifts to other regions. If suddenly someone is bribed, the person will be careful. And if the messenger becomes different, doubts will arise. One more thing. Taehyun cannot read a single line from the war book, but he managed to defeat General Wu Guang. No one from Byongju can repeat this. The garden owner also added that you still need to keep Taehyun close to you. The Lord agreed with all of the above, but the questions didn't end there. The Lord asked what the owner of the garden was planning. He makes Taehyun a messenger and sends him off into the distance to Fort Daisun. So what's the point? Or are there other intentions behind all this? The owner of the garden replied that he believed that Yopo could achieve much more with this position. He will be able to cope with many enemies and gain a corresponding reputation. All this will lead to winning the trust of the people of Binzhou. Why not give a truly talented person a chance? Then the master asked if it was possible to give Yopo one obedient one. We will need to deliver something to General Hajin. When the ruler left the house of the owner of the garden, he walked and thought how cunning he turned out to be. Mr. Deung is considered one of the best strategists in Binzhou, but this time they managed to beat him. At the same time, Mr. Deng had his own thoughts. Through shared experience, he understood what Zhang Jasa meant, but if the letter to Hajin went now, Sipsansi would have considerable doubts, especially if it's right after sending the message to Yo Chung. Is it really worth destroying your reputation? There is no need to try to trap Yopo, because he will be a simple messenger. and it's too late to try to gain respect in Binjo. In the morning, Yopo, rested and well slept, arrived at the master in a good mood. He said that a new hero is needed. The owner of the garden tried to appease his ardor, because this mission was completely different from clearing out thieves. Here you have to show wisdom, since using only force will not work. You need to be careful. Try to think through every step beforehand. The next morning, Yopo set off. They drove for a long time until they saw Hamgok. Taehyun was surprised. How does his man know what it is? Maybe he was in Nakyang, assured that this is not so. But how can he know if he has never been? The servant replied that you don't have to be there to know something. You can learn a lot from books. They contain the experience and wisdom of other generations. It is enough to read at least one book to gain the experience of hundreds of people. He continued his lecture on the benefits of books and said that a book can change history. It can be passed on to the next generation who will learn from it. Taehyun's mood worsened significantly after such a lecture. He even began to think that books were needed only to enslave the world. As they approached the castle, the guards ordered them to stop. They asked where they were from and what the purpose of the visit was. Taehyun said that he must deliver the letter that the eunuch delivered to the palace. But no one opened the gate. Taehyun thought something was wrong. Usually after these words, the gate swung open and several soldiers came out. But after a while, they were let in. The soldiers asked what brought them and where they were from, not from Sakju. Taehyun replied that yes, he is from Sakju Awan. As it turned out, Seyun rebelled, and the palace had to send reinforcements. This was the reason for the delay in admission. Taehyun and his companion were let in. At this time, a meeting was held to clarify the situation regarding the Seyun uprising. The ruler was assured that there was no reason for unrest, and an army of eunuchs had already been sent to the scene. But maybe it would have been better to leave them for later. To this they said that everything was fine and named 3 names: Jusin, Dontak from Seoryang, and Sungchan from Bukpyeong. There were enough of them. There were rumors that the report that was supposed to reach the king was sent to General Hajin. It was also known that a messenger from Binjo passed through the Hamgok region. Does this mean that John Jasa also went to Hajin? No, that's a different story. If Jazz has trust in Hajin. Yeochin Gong was asked if he knew Yopo, who had the report. He answered yes. He met him and contacted Jasa, and he can take care of the situation. But then the question arose, what if Yopo doesn't give a report? They replied that in this case, we would have to do what was necessary. The penmanship teacher asked Yopo why Master Deong asked them to stay at Pure Snail. Taehyun replied that Mrs. Luju would tell them about it, and he assured that precious time would not be wasted on entertainment. In the city, Yopo asked the first person he came across where the Pure Snail was located. He seemed to be afraid of something and said that he knew nothing about it. However, the reason for the flight was stated by a gray-haired old man. He said that anyone would be scared if they saw such a giant. He just scares passers-by. Who is he and why is he doing this? Taehyun approached the old man and asked him to repeat what he had just said. The old man said that British soldiers were taking money from civilians. Everything would be fine, but he was clearly drunk. Taehyun didn't like this. He raised his voice and yelled that he shouldn't be scolded by someone who was already drunk during the day. The old man looked mockingly at Taehyun and said, "You need Pure Snail to frolic with the girls," so he himself would be silent. The old man apparently decided to finish off Taehyun, as he added that he reminded him of his northern enemies. This was a real insult to Yopo, and he reacted accordingly. His eyes lit up with an evil fire. His companion tried to stop the commander, as he realized what turn the matter was taking. He said that there was no point in making a fuss, and that he would rather look for someone else who could show the way. Yopo agreed that there was no time to waste on a showdown. After them, the old man threw out another rudeness, calling Taehyun a useless group of muscles. Taehyun and the teacher walked down the street. They peered at the signs, hoping to find what they needed. They still managed to find the clean snail. They were met by manager Banso himself. He asked the travelers to introduce themselves. Taehyun gave his name and added that he was the commander-in-chief of the Danyo army. However, after that they were not allowed inside. Banso said that in order to enter, you must reserve a place. But Taehyun didn't come for fun. He must carry out orders from beyond Jujas, and he asked to call Ludza. Banso reiterated that they need to reserve a seat first and only then enter. Not everyone can meet Luju. These words angered Taehyun. He yelled that he was following orders, but Banso didn't really care about it. Every day there are at least a dozen such applicants. Only others wear formal clothes, which is not the case with Yopo. Banso ordered them to leave, but they could not even imagine who was standing in front of them. Cho-hen asked, "What if he disobeys the order?" Banso's guards looked at him with contempt and thought that he could not do anything to them. But Cho-hen scattered them like kittens. knocked down the door, and then took Banso by the collar and gave him a good shake. Then he lifted it completely into the air like a feather with one hand. Banso was very scared. He asked to be released. The teacher also asked Cho Hyun to stop, but he did not listen to anyone. Luju appeared on the porch. She couldn't understand what was going on here and why the door was broken. She looked at Cho Hen with fear and realized that he was a source of danger. Luju urged Cho Hen to be noble and not harm her people. Banso, still dangling in the air, tried to make her go away. Cho Hen, seeing her, asked, "Is she the owner of the pure snail?" Luju confirmed that yes, but what does this strange and strong young man need? Why did he come? Cho Hyun introduced himself as Yupo Bunshun from Bayon Jujas, and he was told that here he could meet with General Hajin. Luju asked again to make sure she had not misheard. Cho Hen confirmed everything he said earlier. Luju expressed her sincere condolences that Yupo was not given the welcome he deserved. She apologized for the incident and said that he and his companion could feel at home. She invited them to come in and asked the manager to help the guests. The table was set in the private room. Behind him sat Luja and Cho Hen. The hostess said that on the 5th day of the new moon, there would be a meeting with the general at the house of official Wang. The official was a government employee who has the favor of Juju Jazz. This official's name is Wang Yong. From these words, Cho Hen, who was peacefully eating the bird, almost choked. He knew well that Wang Yong was Cho Sun's adoptive father. After a hearty lunch, Cho Hen took his leave and said that he had to go. And in his absence, he asked to take care of his companion, who was lying on the floor, unconscious. It was a very nervous day. Cho Hen walked down the street and thought, how could he forget this road? After all, this was the way to Cho Sun. Previously, she always went out onto the porch and met him at dawn. These warm memories. There were always a couple of neighbor kids with her. They always ticked away when they saw him. Cho Sun was very beautiful. He remembered the girl he met a year ago. She did look like Cho Sun, but she had nothing to do with her. However, they may have dated before Cho Sun became Wang Yun's adopted daughter. He wanted to quickly meet with the official. He did not look around, and in vain, since several sharp eyes were watching him. But apparently Cho Hen had too well-developed intuition, and he felt some movement behind him. He stopped and asked, "Did they come for him?" But there was no answer. Then Cho Hen made a sharp turn and met his opponents face to face. He was ready to fight. Without thinking twice, he plunged his sword into the body of the first enemy he came across. He then looked at the others and said that he would give them another chance if they told them who had assigned them to spy on him. The leader of this gang gave the command to kill, but the first one who tried to do this was immediately captured. Cho Hen grabbed him tightly by the throat and said that he would now take off his mask to see who was hiding under it. When the mask was removed, Cho Hen saw that behind it was a man with a cut-off nose. This was usually how prisoners who committed serious crimes were punished. Cho Hen realized that the information had leaked and someone found out that he was carrying a letter with him. So these are the enemies of Hajin, and now you need to do everything to keep the message safe. You can't hesitate. We need to try to get to Hajin as quickly as possible. Cho Hen walked to the door of the Keiji temple and began knocking on the door so that it would be open for him so he could meet Wang Yong. The gatekeeper opened the door slightly to see who was so insistently breaking in on them. Cho Hen said his name was Yupo Bunshun. He also added, they told him that they would let him in if he sent Ludza. Cho Hyun was allowed to enter. It turned out that Master Wang was not there, but he should arrive in the evening. Cho Hen asked to give him a room. During the stop, a child will serve him. She was a fragile and small girl with big eyes. She looked at Cho Hen carefully, and fear splashed in her eyes. Cho Hen proceeded to the room reserved for him, but one thought haunted him. The girl who was supposed to serve him looked a lot like Cho Sun, but she was then in Wang Yong's house, so this is some kind of incredible coincidence. Maybe it's still her? His thoughts were interrupted by a knock on the door and the message that the bath was ready. He walked to the door and opened it sharply. This girl was standing there. She said dinner would be ready after the bath for some reason. Cho Hyun looked at her and saw Cho Sun in front of him. The girl began to say that if Cho Hyun needed anything, but did not have time to complete the sentence, as Cho Hen approached her and knelt down. She looked at Cho Hen with wide open and surprised eyes, but he did not see this look. He began to ask Cho Sun for forgiveness. He said that he was to blame for her, and it was only his fault that she died. He asked forgiveness for walking ahead of her. When the girl turned to him, Cho Hen recoiled as if stung. He looked at her with no less surprise than she looked at him. But then I finally decided to ask. Maybe he had seen her before. He then used some kind of magic on her and said that he was glad to see her, but it was better to end the relationship. Then he jerked her towards him. The girl asked what he was doing. She hoped that Cho Hyun wouldn't recognize her, but that didn't work out that way. She said that she was incredibly glad to see him, her savior, and hugged him tightly. They went into the house, and she told her story. When Cho Hen saved her, she was noticed by Mr. Wang. He was also glad to hear her beautiful singing. Then Wang Yang brought it here because he needed an assistant in the house. He also helped her, and helped her bury her father. It turns out the flag she was holding meant her father's death. God, how hard it was for her. She asked how Cho Hyun knew her name. He replied that the housekeeper called her that. It turns out that this beautiful name, Cho Sun, was given to her by Mr. Wang. She then asked why Cho Hen was back in Nakyang. He replied that he was carrying out a small assignment related to the delivery of a letter. Only for him, everything that happens seems quite strange. Cho Hen asked her for help and handed over a scroll, a letter for the general. It contains a report on the performance of the Jazz government, which is submitted twice a year. She looked at the picture carefully and said that this was all strange. She explained this by saying that if it is a performance report, it is immediately sent to the palace. But Cho Hen was instructed to hand it over to the general. Cho Hen said that something was bothering him. He would like to look at the contents of the scroll, but he cannot read. Cho Sun looked carefully at the scroll and said, "It's good that Cho Hyun didn't try to open the letter. It was tied with rope and tied in a knot. But it is difficult to untie. You just need to cut it." Cho Hen said, if so, then this idea should be abandoned. But Cho Sun said that she knows a way to get rid of the knot. Cho Hen looked at her in surprise, because he did not understand what she was up to. But Cho Sun did not answer, but simply removed the knot from the scroll and unrolled it. After looking at the contents, she said that it was about provisions, support system, war horses. Perhaps there will be some kind of war. She also read that the northern enemy had begun to move and she needed to prepare for it. It also said not to worry about the scientist. The fort can be surrendered to him in the same way as Managok was surrendered. Cho Hen listened carefully to every word. He realized that they were going to give Managok to the scientist. But what did that mean? He's an enemy, but it turns out he's not. Cho Sun explained that Managok belongs to the lands of Bingzhou. The scientist returned there. Cho Hen talked about old times. Thousands of soldiers under the command of the scientist set fire to many villages. The latter were not prepared for such an outcome and disappeared. He could not find the bodies of his parents, and he went to serve Zhengjias to take revenge. However, now he had an epiphany. The cause of all the troubles turned out to be Zhengjias himself. Cho Hen was furious. He said that he understood things that he did not know before, and now he is ready to return to Binzhou to kill Zhengjias. Cho Sun pressed her palms to his face and said that he shouldn't do this. She understands everything perfectly, but it is impossible to win only through impulsiveness. She knows nothing about the size of his army, but his people will be against the whole of Binzhou. Cho Hen looked at her and was once again surprised at how smart this girl was. He admitted that she was right, and it was impossible to cope with the problem using only emotions. He remembered the ruler and asked what he should do. He definitely won't just sit idly by, but how to catch Zhengjias in a lie. Cho Sun thought and said that human resources must be valued first. If everything said in the letter is true, he will have to fight against the scientists and people of Jazz. To cope with them, you need a good strategist. She also said that he is a famous general, which means someone will be looking for him. When the time comes, Cho Hyun will definitely meet this person. He can remember King Guhan, who ruled the Yue Empire. To carry out his revenge, he waited for 3 whole years. He even forced his own wife to rant. Cho Hen just needs to be patient. Everything has its time. Cho Hyun once again admitted that Cho Sun was right. To complete an important task, you need to be well prepared. He looked at her and asked her to read further. Perhaps there was something else important in the letter. She looked at the document and said that there was nothing else in it. And then she asked what Cho Hen's plans were. He said that he would not rush, so as not to harm anyone. Cho Hen decided that that was enough for today, because it was getting late. He said goodbye to Cho Sun and looked at her carefully. He still considered her smart and wise, and the meeting with her happened too early. A man watched the touching farewell scene. He pulled the bowstring and shot an arrow towards Cho Sun. But fortunately the arrow did not reach its target. She was intercepted by Cho Hen. He was very scared for her and even thought that the girl was wounded. She sat on the ground and looked at the roof of the house and saw with horror how the bowstring was pulled back again. Cho Hen, without thinking twice, rushed to the roof like lightning and ordered her to wait for him on the spot. Cho Sun looked carefully at the arrow tied with a blue ribbon, and some thought came to her mind. Meanwhile, Cho Hen was chasing the offender who fled in panic, and he thought how strange everything was. Usually his arrows always flew past, but this time they hit. You need to get away quickly, otherwise he will be in trouble. Cho Hen swooped down on the offender like a kite. He grabbed him by the neck and began to choke him. He will kill him if he does not tell who instructed him to complete the task. The guy asked for forgiveness and was ready to tell everything if he would let him go. Cho Hen threw him like a feather. He flew quite far and fell face down on the ground. Cho Hen thought how strange it was that the killer did not hide his face. Maybe he's from another camp. In general, he seemed quite old, but did not have a beard. Maybe it was a eunuch? When the killer stood up, Cho Hen began asking him questions. Why was he trying to hit the girl and not him? The killer said there was a misunderstanding. He didn't want to kill anyone, but had to deliver a letter. But apparently Cho Hen didn't like this answer and hit the man again with force. He asked if he knew that Cho Hyun was supposed to meet with General Ha Jin. Is he one of 10 lackeys? The killer began to repent that he had shot an arrow with a letter attached to it. The arrow flew at the girl completely by accident. Cho Hen began asking about the contents of the letter. The messenger said that it contained an invitation from Duty Officer Jochin to a secret meeting. Tomorrow at 9 p.m. he will be waiting for him on the Sampo Bridge outside the Western Gate. Cho Hen also wanted to know about the reason for the meeting, but the messenger knew nothing about it. He was simply carrying out an assignment. Cho Hen scratched his head and said, "Let him tell Sir Joe that the general cannot read." Therefore, the letter made no sense. Cho Hen told him to go away while he was good. And then I thought that I could kill him, but why? Was the messenger simply following orders? The next evening, Cho Hyun met Cho Soon again at Wang Yong's estate. She said the situation was terrible. 10 people on duty can use the Emperor's power. How will he deal with them? She was worried about him, although he assured that he was not going to die. Cho Sun replied that it was impossible to know. It was not clear how the situation would develop further. Basically, Cho Hen should just give a report, but he wasn't going to do that. Then he told her about his plan. Since people love intrigue and cunning, he will take advantage of it. Cho Sun thought that he was going to make a deal with them, but that was not the case. Cho Hen tried to find out what other messages these people would like to receive. If General Ha Jin hides Zhang Jia's weaknesses, it won't be enough. Cho Hen said he was leaving but would be back soon. The way she doesn't worry about him. Cho Sun looked at him with her huge eyes and asked Cho Hyun to be careful. It was deep night. They were already waiting for Cho Hen at the indicated place. He arrived at exactly the appointed time, calm and unperturbed as always, and he immediately introduced himself. He was asked to do without formalities, since time was not flexible. Therefore, it is better to get straight to the point. The general asked, "Where is the letter?" He also assumed that Cho Hen already understood why he was called to this meeting. But Cho Hen did not agree to give the letter. The general looked at him in surprise, as he did not expect such a turn of events. And Cho Hen calmly continued that the letter was hidden in a safe place that only he knew. He specially took care of security so that bandits could not steal it. The general thought that Cho Hen was just mocking him. His men surrounded Yopo on all sides. Sharp blades were pointed at his neck. The general said that he knew very well that Cho Hen was illiterate, but he thought that he would guess what was happening. But it seems he was simply mistaken, and Cho Hen is not as smart as he seemed. Yopo began to explain that if he lost the report, he would not survive. The general said that in this case, he could die right here. Cho Hen said that it makes no difference to him whether he dies now or later. The general said that he seemed to have underestimated Cho Hen. Then he suggests the following. Cho Hen will receive a generous reward. It will be enough to live comfortably the rest of your life, hiding from the people of Zhangjias. Cho Hen offered his own option. He is ready to tell what is written in the report. But this option clearly did not suit the general so much that he became very angry. He said that it would not work to make a clown out of him, and Cho Hen would give the letter right now. Yopo once again repeated that he could not give the letter back, but was ready to reveal its contents. But in exchange, he asks for one wish to be granted. The general looked at him in surprise. How can he know the contents of the report if he cannot read? Yopo said that yes, that's true, but he got help. Yopo realized that his bait had worked. They considered him a traitor and asked what he wanted. The answer was an officer position in Binzhou. The general said it was easy. But if there is nothing valuable in the content of the letter, Cho Hen will pay for wasting his time. Cho Hen bowed politely and continued. He asked if the general knew that Zhang Jiasu had recently conquered the Hoguang region. The general remembered hearing about this. He knows there are soldiers there, but how many he doesn't know. Cho Hen said that there are a couple of tens of thousands of them there, and they are awaiting orders from General Ha Jin. Zhang Jiasa is going to send all these soldiers to the capital. This news was stunning. But while they were talking, An attempt was made to attack the general. It was the same messenger who used the arrow to convey the message. However, the attempt failed. The general drew his sword and seriously wounded the messenger. The general showed a bloody sword and said that Jazz has his own plans for the capital, especially considering that several thousand well-trained soldiers are ready to move into it. Cho-hen said that Jasa is almost ready to hand over the main front. The reaction of the general, who thought that Jas had gone crazy, was heartening. Cho-hen thought that if he were told that Don Ruo from Western Liang also had secret communication with the general, he would be completely delighted. Cho-hen said that this was the entire report. The general thought there was something else about him. The general continued his monologue. He said he always liked people with ambition. It is difficult for him to predict what heights those who are strong in spirit and have noble thoughts will be able to achieve. Often a beautiful shell hides a disgusting filling. But he trusts those who are ambitious, authoritative, and rich. If their needs are met, they are unlikely to dare to betray. The messenger was barely alive and kept trying to understand why they did this to him. The general said that this was a kind of apology for the fact that Cho-hen was injured by one of his men. It also meant Cho-hen's success in Binzhou. The general asked if Cho-hen was happy. He replied that he would, and if he asked for anything else, he would be mistaken for a greedy person. The general said that they would have excellent relations and left. Now he must return and tell Cho-sun that the plan was a complete success. Everything went great. Ahead, he noticed that a van had stopped and Wang Yun was getting out. It turns out he's back. Cho-hen approached Wang Yang. He turned around, realized who was in front of him, and invited Cho-hen to his house. Wang Yang invited Cho-hen to sit down, and he happily agreed. And the first question that was asked was, what was Cho-hen doing outside? Why did the messenger who was supposed to deliver the report show up late? Wang Yang looked menacingly at Cho-hen and thought that he was probably meeting someone, which is why he was late. Cho-hen was somewhat outraged by these questions. He asked why Wang Yang was trying to scold him. Wang Yang said that this was not even in his thoughts. He was just worried about the report. Cho-hen said that he left the document in his room immediately after his arrival. This can be easily checked if desired. The meeting ended and Cho-hen went home. He recalled that Wang Yang clearly had doubts, but thanks to Cho-hen's restraint, he did not get caught. Cho-hyun returned to his place, where Cho-sun was waiting for him. He opened the door slightly. She did not immediately notice him, and when she realized that Cho-hen had returned, she rushed to hug him. Of course, she was waiting for him, and immediately asked if everything went well. She was very worried because it was already late. Cho-hen looked at her carefully and said that everything went well. What good news this is. Now you can safely eat and drink something. Cho-sun brought food and wine. Cho-hen tried it and realized that he already knew this taste. He had known it a long time ago. Cho-sun replied that she brought him Ju-yun-chun. From these words, Teo-hen almost dropped his glass and asked, did she bring him the alcohol of the Cow clan? It turns out he knew who made the drink and thought he was a bastard. Cho-sun thought that Cho-hyun had something in common with the Cow family and asked him to tell the story. Cho-hen said that he was bound by a huge duty, which he could fulfill on the battlefield. And when the time comes, they will fight against each other for the same goal. But then Cho-sun didn't understand how Cho-hyun knew that they hired fierce soldiers and scientists. Cho-hen replied that he was not sure about that. He may only be planning to do this, but he knows some of his people well. Cho-sun thought for a moment and then pointed her finger at the carafe with the drink. And she asked, did he not like the drink as soon as he found out who produced it? Cho-hen replied yes. Then she said that the problem was not in the alcohol, but in Cao himself, and again held out the jug. You can take away the enemy's great soldiers, Guan-chun and brains. Cho-hen himself recently said that he knows people on his side. She handed him a bottle of wine and said that he urgently needed to find an advisor who would give his actions a noble purpose. And if he finds such a person, then the scientists themselves will follow him. Cho-hyun looked attentively at the cup, and the thought voiced by Cho-sun pleased him. Then he took the vessel from her and drank it in one gulp. It looks like the liquor was very strong. Cho-hen immediately became drunk and said that he would take everything for himself, the best soldiers, liquor, scientists. Cho-sun was afraid that Cho-hyun's screams would cause everyone to wake up. The next morning, Cho-hen went to meet Wang Chonglan. A dear old lady saw him off. Wang Yang invited Cho-hyun to pass. Chief General Ha-jin was already present there. He was a tall, stately man with an intelligent and piercing gaze, as well as a gloomy expression on his face. Cho-hen bowed politely and said his full name. Then he took a letter out of his pocket and handed it to General Ha-jin. The general looked carefully at the scroll and concentrated on the knot. Apparently something seemed strange to him. Cho-hen remembered the previous night. Then Cho-sun said that the scroll was tied with a special knot. and she knows a way to make exactly the same knot that was there. And for this, she needs to concentrate as much as possible. The general continued to peer at the bundle, noting its neatness. In addition, the node turned out to be completely clean. Wasn't Cho Hen tempted to open it? Cho Hen admitted that he couldn't even write his own name, and even if he opened it, he would not be able to understand anything. General Hajin expected this. He liked the way the inspector conducted his business. General Hajin displayed a short sword made in the northern regions, and he asked Wang Chonglan if he knew that such swords were short. However, he laughed and said that he didn't know. He was also from Binzhou. Moreover, he was a scientist, so he never used a sword. Then the general carefully cut the knot that tied the scroll with the dagger of the 7 stars, unfolded the letter, and began to carefully study it. Cho Hen sat and thought that so far everything was going according to plan. Meanwhile, General Hajin and Wang Chonglan sat and continued their conversation. Wang Yang said that he had something for the general, and Cho Hen sat and thought what they were now ready to involve him in. They were talking about some girl from Binzhou. She sold herself to pay for her father's funeral, and Wang Yang brought her immediately after paying for the ceremony. Cho Hen listened to all this with his eyes wide open. General Hajin said he was ready to sleep with minors from all 13 provinces. As the legend said, if you do this, you can avoid death. The general ordered this girl to be sent immediately to his house after preparation. Cho Hen was infuriated by the fact that dirty, disgusting, and old scumbags were willing to sleep with young children. Apparently, the men were so captivated by the conversation that they forgot about the existence of Cho Hen. But then the general remembered that they were not alone. Cho Hen bowed his head, pretending that he had not heard or seen anything. Wang Chonglan relied on his virtue. The general considered that the inspector was very lucky with his assistant. The general suggested to Wang Chonglan that he give Cho Hen food and drink before leaving, because he had a long way back. And Cho Henu said that he would not give an answer and would make himself known when the time came. Cho Hen asked permission to leave. He has already taken a few steps, but I heard the continuation of the conversation. Wang Chonglan said that the girl was young and very seductive, but he doesn't know her name or clan, so he just called her Cho Sun. When Cho Hen heard this name, his hands involuntarily clenched into fists. Cho Hen went outside, sat down on a bench and rested his head in his hands. He sat and thought. It finally dawned on him that it was impossible to solve the problem at a distance from Cho Sun. He thought about how to save her. He sat and did not notice anything or anyone around. And opposite sat an old man who was watching Cho Hen. The old man thought that such a young man had simply gone crazy. Cho Hen heard the muttering and realized that he was not alone. He looked at the old man and realized that he had seen him before. It was the same old man whom he had previously met at the bronze camel statue. He sat as if nothing had happened and held a bottle of alcohol in his hands. He decided to ask what was bothering the young man. What insoluble problem did he face that made him so gloomy and worried? Cho Hen simply said that today was not his day. The old man sat and grinned. He assumed that the guy in the salon had found some impudent whore, or that someone higher in position had stolen the one he really liked from her. These words simply made Cho Hen's stomach ache. He stood up and resolutely walked towards the old man. He apparently got scared and loudly said that Cho Hen should not waste his time in vain and began to act. There's no point in just shaking the air now while his girlfriend could be stolen. Cho Hen also raised his voice in response. He started pointing his finger at the old man and said that no one had the right to tell him what to do. He will return the girl no matter what. These words made the old man very happy. He said that's the way it should be. We must act decisively. But he did not remain silent any further and asked Cho Hen what his plans were then. Yes, outwardly he seems very strong. But does he really think that if he starts a massacre in the capital, he will then be able to get out alive? And even if he manages to survive, they will still find him later. But apparently the old man was not as simple as he seemed. He went on to say that people who overestimate their strength bring their end closer. Even the strongest people in history can lose everything they have. These words made Cho Hen think for a moment. But he was always determined and never gave up on his plans, so he stubbornly repeated that he would do it anyway. This is much better than later regretting what was not done, and he will protect the girl, even if his own life becomes a big mistake. The old man reacted to his last words with loud laughter. He said that this is the right thing to do and he is ready to help him survive, even if Cho Hen does what he wants. Cho Hen thought about how he could help him, because he could hardly even lift his finger. The old man replied that strength is of course good, but it's not the only thing that helps you succeed. During his time in combat, he learned several important things. The old man stood up, smiled, and asked, maybe Cho Hen would like him to lend him his wisdom. While Cho Hen was deciding important issues, his assistant was enjoying the female company to the fullest. The girls clung to him. They asked how he could write so beautifully. The young man replied that his inspiration was female beauty. Therefore, the words are written by themselves. The appearance of Cho Hen was unpleasant and unexpected for him. Cho Hen grabbed him by the scruff of the neck and dragged him, as there was no time. The girls waved after him and shouted that they were waiting for his return. Night has come. The assistant looked after the horses and kept asking Cho Hen why he made him leave. Cho Hen put on a mask and ordered him to wait here. The assistant didn't like this whole story very much. He didn't understand why Cho Hen didn't just leave him alone if he left him waiting in the stable. Where is he going? What kind of mask is he wearing? Questions that had no answers, and in general, he believed that Cho Hen should have allowed him to go with him. But Cho Hen didn't listen to anything. He kept hatching some kind of plan. In the end, he said that he knew how to get out without going through the gate. That old man gave him this idea. He really knew a lot of things. But Cho Hen kept worrying. What if this idea turned out to be dangerous? The old man did not understand him. How is it that Cho Hen wanted to carry out a real massacre in the capital and now began to worry? The old man asked simply to tell him when his help was needed. Cho Hen shouted that he was ready to do it right now. The old man said, as soon as he takes the girl, he needs to go to the old well, which is at the western gate. He will be waiting there until 1 in the morning. If he is late, the old man will leave. Guards carefully guarded the entrance. There were at least 4 of them. One of them heard some strange sounds and asked who was coming. Cho Hen suddenly appeared in front of him wearing a mask. He was very scary. The guards shouted at him to immediately take off his mask and show his face or he would be killed. One of them prepared to draw his sword. But Cho Hen was much faster. The guards were very scared. Their eyes were wide open in horror. Cho Hen entered the battle. The explosion blew out the main gate. Other soldiers in the area became aware of the intrusion. They started to fuss, but they caught it too late, since Cho Hen was already inside the castle. Seeing that there was only one invader, they were surprised. Where did the guards outside go? She was all dead. One of the bravest shouted to Cho Hen that he apparently just wanted death since he was going straight through the main gate. He drew his sword and screaming "Die!" attacked Cho Hen. Cho Hen took out his sword and killed the daredevil in one motion. Cho Hen thought that these were the general's elite guards. But why do they make such useless movements? They just looked like homeless people. But swordsmanship in the Sili region was clearly not at a high level. Cho Hen drew his sword again and thought that he should not waste time here. The opponents in front of him were too weak. He began to kill, sparing no one. Each blow was precise and lightning fast. The soldiers fell as if killed. When all the opponents were destroyed, he prepared to jump and was inside in the blink of an eye. He was fast as an arrow. He realized that General Ha-jin was still here. This means that Cho-sun stayed here too. Therefore, we need to check Wang Yun's bedroom first. He approached the door, carefully opened it, and got inside. There was no one in the room. He ran as fast as he could. Cho Hen carefully examined the room. He thought that he should choose a better weapon since his sword was pretty damaged during the journey. He noticed a sword on the table. It was the 7 Stars dagger. At first he thought that he could take it. And then I decided no. Let him remain in his place so that Cao Cao is eliminated from the game. Looking around the room again, Cho Hen noticed something on the wall. It was another huge sword. If you take it, you will immediately notice the loss. Or maybe it's just decoration. The sword was so huge that it was difficult even for a general to handle it. While Cho Hen was examining the find, the door to the room quietly opened. It was one of the general's soldiers. He immediately shouted loudly that he had found a thief who was now trying to steal the sword. Other soldiers immediately came running to this cry. Cho Hen realized that they simply left him no choice. He will have to fight with this huge sword. Cho Hen easily pulled it out and immediately killed the first soldier he came across. Then there was a deafening explosion, due to which the roof of the building simply shattered into splinters. People standing in the yard looked and did not understand what was happening. When the building began to fold like a house of cards, they ran away in horror. They rushed despite themselves. Among these people was Cho's son. They pushed her, but a soldier managed to grab her. The girl thanked him for saving her. He grabbed her and lifted her, ordering her to follow him. A great general is waiting for her. Cho's son looked at him with wide eyes and did not understand why she should follow the order. Then the soldier grabbed her roughly and said that he had no time to talk. She should listen. And if she doesn't listen, then he'll have to. But he did not have time to finish the last words. Cho Hen's powerful blow threw the soldier quite far away. Cho Hen was so glad that he found her. The first thing he did was ask if she was okay. She looked at him, and there were tears in her eyes. Cho-sun asked a question. She had previously told him that he should wait, and Cho-hyun agreed with this. But doesn't he know that hasty decisions always lead to sad consequences? Cho-hen decided to explain the situation. He said that Wang Yong's help was not out of kindness. He just believed in some nonsense and was looking for a young girl for the general. He found her, and everything that Cho-hyun did was only to save Cho-sun herself. If he doesn't take her, then the nasty old man will do something bad to her. But Cho-sun, instead of gratitude, said that she would not go anywhere. She has no choice if she wants to survive. She asked Cho-hen to leave as soon as possible. Perhaps they have not yet realized who invaded them. Cho-hen decided to convince her that she was wrong. She is very smart and should understand perfectly well that the general is not going to protect her. And everything she says now is a banal lie. She wants Cho-hyun to stay out of all this. He placed his hand on her head like a father and began to stroke her. Cho-hyun said that he knows very well that Cho-sun is a very mature girl for her age, but despite this, she is still the child who needs to be protected. Cho-hen simply took her and hugged her tightly. Cho-chun was really worried about Cho-hyun because he could have been seriously injured. He asked her to come with him. This time he is ready to protect her, even at the cost of his own life. Cho-hyun and Cho-sun approached the old well, but there was no one there. Cho-hen decided that the old man had not kept his promise. He didn't see anyone. Cho-sun asked, "Is he waiting for someone?" But the old man was there. He stood behind them. He said that he expected anything but Wang Yong's house to be blown up. Cho-hen said that if the old man planned to hide, he should have warned him. The old man said that Cho-hen caused a lot of noise. He heard everything even from here. The old man called him a pig, which was very unexpected for Cho-hen. He thought that the old man had simply gone crazy. However, the old man thought exactly the same about Cho-hen himself. He decided that he just wanted to get a minor. How could he put his hand on such an innocent creature? Cho-hen backed away and said that the old man was simply very mistaken. This is not true at all. The old man demanded an explanation. He never thought that he would have to help a pedophile kidnap a girl. Cho-sun grabbed onto Cho-hyun and screamed that he was not like that at all. He saved her because he felt sorry for her. Cho-sun said that Cho-hyun was just sorry for the situation she found herself in, and he promised that he would protect her at the cost of his own life. The old man asked again, and then said that usually such tricks are used by pedophiles to lure victims. Cho-sun said that this is not true. Cho-hyun is like an older brother to her. The old man thought for a few seconds and then said, "Brother is brother. In fact, it doesn't matter. You shouldn't stay here. You need to go." Cho-sun grabbed Cho-hyun by the clothes and began to hurry him. The old man led them to the ruins of the house. Cho-hen shouted that he thought they were leaving the city. He didn't ask to be taken to a place where they could hide. The old man told him to shut up and open the gate. Everything seemed extremely suspicious. There was dead silence. The old man said that you need to stay alert. The old man walked up to the stone wall, put his hand to it, and pressed. A passage has opened. Cho-hyun and Cho-sun looked at him blankly. The old man explained the situation. Many years ago, Emperor Guanyu Di was rebuilding his own empire. He constantly fought with Wang Mang. Many people died in the Battle of Lulin. They marveled how the heart of the empire could fall so quickly. To escape from Lulin, many secret passages were made to allow important people to escape. This passage was one of them. The old man called to follow him as quickly as possible. Cho-sun was clinging to Cho-hyun and was very worried. He reassured her, promising that everything would be fine. The old man asked if Cho-hen's horse was ready, but he replied that she was at the Sanbao Bridge with a subordinate. The old man said that we need to go. The passage should lead them straight to the bridge, and so it happened. Cho-hyun put Cho-sun on the horse, and the subordinate had to ride with the old man. He grumbled that his grandfather smelled very strongly of alcohol. After a while, they decided to stop for the night. Everyone was very exhausted from the long journey. The old man asked where Cho-hen got such a huge sword. He calmly replied that he stole it from Wang Yong. The old man said, "First Cho-hen kidnapped the girl. Now it turns out that he is also a thief. So he got in trouble on his own unfortunate head." Cho-hen replied that such a comparison was unacceptable. He saved her, not kidnapped her. The old man nevertheless asked to show him the sword. Cho-hen just wanted to tell the old man not to strain himself, since the sword is too big. But suddenly he snatched it easily. The old man looked at the sword with admiration. He said that he had come across many good swords before, but he had never seen anything like it. Such a sword simply must have a name. He examined the blade carefully. There were symbols engraved on it, but he didn't know what they meant. Suddenly Cho-sun intervened in the conversation. She said that these symbols belonged to the Ying family. Cho Hen asked again, and thought that this must be a very important family since it has its own symbols. The old man still held the sword. Yi said that the Ying family means the Qin royal family. Cho Sun looked at the symbols carefully again. She was able to recognize one. It was a black deer. So in front of them was the sword of Emperor Qin Ying Zheng. Cho Hen asked the old man what surprised him so much. He replied that he was just an idiot for not understanding what he was talking about. Has he really not heard anything about the black deer and sword of Emperor Qin Shi Huang? While they were discussing the sword, Wang Yang was informed that all the guards on duty in the estate had been killed. Wang Yang realized that the report did not end there and asked to continue. The servant said that one of the 12 treasures was missing. Cho Hen held the sword in his hands and examined it. Is this weapon really that cool? Yes, the sword is certainly comfortable and big, but... Cho Sun decided to tell him more about the discovery. This weapon was known. He was written about in the notes of the great historian in the chapter on the biography of the murderers. Rumor has it that this sword belonged to King Zhou or General Bai Qi, but no one knows for sure whether this is so. The old man decided to make his contribution and added that this sword is a symbol of the Qin Empire. He always appeared only at coronation ceremonies. There are a lot of rumors surrounding this weapon. Some even say that whoever can wield this sword will rule the whole world. Cho Hen snorted that it was an ordinary sword, and all conversations concerning the rulers of the world and domination are meaningless. The old man grinned. Cho Hen thinks this is an ordinary sword? But he managed to try it out in battle. Cho Hen began to remember. Yes, he did everything in a hurry, but everything was very strange when, using this sword, he killed. But even for him, this weapon is too large and difficult to unsheath. Cho Hen thought that this sword would be too heavy for a backup weapon. However, he can easily replace the halberd. The old man was surprised that Cho Hen knew how to use a halberd. They say that this weapon is simply impossible to use. Cho Hen grinned and said that those who think so simply do not understand anything. He will definitely demonstrate his skills as time permits. The old man said if Cho Hen managed to surprise him, he would do something in return. Cho Hen asked if the old man knew how to forge. If yes, then he can become a blacksmith in his squad. The old man said he could, but there is no point in recruiting him. Many have already tried to hire him, but to no avail. Cho Hen apparently decided to offend him. He said, "Stop praising yourself. If he shows what he is capable of, he will receive a good reward." The old man roared at these words. He considered this proposal simply impudent. The assistant expressed his opinion that the idea was not as bad as it seemed, and in general it seems to him that the old man is special. After all, he could easily lift the sword. Maybe he is on some other level from the others? What happened at Wang Yang's estate became known throughout the city. Hajin and his men thought that 10 guards were behind the attack, and the eunuchs, in turn, thought that the general simply wanted to get rid of them. Chaos began again in Luoyang. No one thought about the messenger who was going on a dubious journey. Cho Sun asked Cho Hyun, whom she now constantly called brother, to be careful. She believed that he should not have known the contents of the report and gave parting instructions. If anyone questions him, he should not tell the whole truth. The old man listened to these speeches and thought that Cho Hen would still ignore all the advice and do as he saw fit. Cho Hyun ordered the henchman to go with the old man and Cho Sun and get food. Any nearby noodle shop should know who Cho Hen is. Cho Hen asked the old man to hold the sword for a moment. He was surprised. Is Cho Hen really ready to entrust him with such a valuable item? Cho Hen even suggested that the old man take the sword if he wanted. The old man was completely amazed. People are ready to die for touching this treasure, but he takes it and just gives it away. Cho Hen said that this sword was still not capable of making him a king. Is it possible that if he waves it, bags of rice will appear? This is an ordinary sword and nothing more. And he still offered the old man to take the sword if he wanted. He was quite serious when he suggested this. The old man looked after Cho Hen and thought, is he an ordinary bang or not? Meanwhile, the owner of the garden was sitting in his office. There was a knock on the door and said that Sir Lu Fenxian wanted to see him. He ordered to let him in. It was Cho Hen himself who reported that the mission entrusted to him had been completed and the letter had been delivered to the general. The owner of the garden asked, "Did the general say something?" Cho Hen replied that he had not, but he wondered if he had printed it out. He looked at Cho Hen in horror. Did he really dare to open the report? Cho Hyun remembered what Cho Sun said. She asked him to answer questions with half-truths. The teacher asked about the seal. Cho Hen assured that she was cut by the general's sword. The teacher smiled. He thought that if Cho Hen had opened the report, he would no longer be here. In general, he has recently become very suspicious. The teacher suggested something to drink. He continued that it had been a long time since they sat like this together talking. You can drink liqueur, not tea. Cho Hen said that he had dried meat with him. He took it out and put it on the table. The liquor was poured into cups. The teacher was very pleased. He said that he had not drunk like this for a long time, and he was already drunk. But Cho Hen asked an unexpected question about the seal on the report. He noticed that she was special. Maybe the report was somehow unique and was written by an inspector. The teacher said that Cho Hen was right, and even though the teacher is as close to the inspector as a thread and a needle, he does not always write letters to him. But Cho Hen continued to ask further questions. He asked, "Does the teacher think that a thread and a needle serve different purposes?" He sincerely admitted that he did not expect such a question. Cho Hen noted that not so long ago, a teacher would have been very surprised by such a question. It seems to him that he is now talking to a person with great experience. The teacher took this as a compliment. He noted that Cho Hen had also matured a lot. He had to go through a lot. Cho Hen remembered what happened to him earlier. He thought the teacher had seen the report. The teacher replied that Cho Hen was not yet ready for the contents of the report, and he needed to be careful with his own requests. So far, he is only an ordinary general of a border fortress, and nothing more. But if he is interested in the contents of the official report, then he knows what to do. Cho Hen sat and thought. If the teacher has anything to do with what happened in his village, then he will be in trouble. A troubled death awaits him. And he said out loud that soon his name would become known throughout Binzhou. When he returns, he will be a hero who has crushed the enemy. Until then, the teacher needs to be careful. The teacher wished him luck and said that we were looking forward to good news. In the meantime, Cho Hen was solving his problems. His assistant, the old man, and Cho Sun were filling their bellies with food. However, they did not have enough money with them to pay. The innkeeper shouted, "Why the hell did they order so much food without having the required amount of money with them?" The assistant said that General Liu would come soon and decide everything. The innkeeper yelled, "Was he really waiting for that same warrior from Tanyi's army? He won't fall for it because he simply doesn't believe it." The old man and Cho Sun were sitting at the table. There were many empty plates in front of them. The owner of the establishment still demanded payment from them. While they were bickering, Cho Hen appeared. He said that he had not appeared here for a long time, as there was a lot of business outside the castle. The owner immediately recognized him and said that he had not seen him for a long time. The assistant immediately began to complain to the owner that he did not listen to him, but he just laughed it off. Cho Hen decided to find out how much he needed to pay. The owner decided to ask again, "Does he really know the general?" The assistant said he tried to report it, but was not listened to. The owner apologized and said that there are a lot of cheaters around. At this time, another visitor entered the establishment. He asked if the owner was working and if he could ask him for a bowl of noodles. All participants in the conversation turned towards the voice. They looked at the new arrival with great amazement. He asked what happened to their faces. Cho Hen paid for his people in silver. The owner didn't even have time to say that he didn't have to pay him before they left. They were in a hurry to get somewhere. Cho Hen walked very quickly and thought. He recognized who had entered the tavern. He wanted nothing to do with this man. But Cho Hen had not taken too many steps when he heard a scream. This man who entered the tavern asked him to stop and come back. The schemer Dong Zhuo, who allowed him to seize power. His amazing talents attracted unnecessary attention and envy. For this reason he had to lie low for a while. But after a while, Wang Yun tricked Liu Bei into betraying Dong Zhuo and taking all the power for himself. This gave Jia Shu the opportunity to make himself known. Although Liu Bei's amazing strength gave him a certain advantage in battles, everything changed when Jia Shu began to use tactics. Liu Bei had to sink to the very bottom. Then for the first time in his life he felt powerless, and he perfectly remembered the humiliation that he had to endure. Jia Shu said that he just heard from the owner that this is the same Liu Bei who managed to defeat thousands of Wuguang soldiers with a small army, and he would like to join his army. Cho Hen looked at him and wondered what the hell he was doing here. Jia Shu forgot to introduce himself and corrected this mistake. Cho Hen said nothing and only thought that it would be better if he left him alone. But he said his name out loud and asked him to disappear wholesale. He did not expect this. He didn't even know about the thoughts that were hovering in Cho Hen's head. And he thought that he could not kill him here, but on the battlefield, all debts would be paid. But Jia Shu turned out to be very persistent and repeated his request. Cho Hen turned to him and said that he did not want him in his army. He had never met him before, so why would he agree to take him for himself? Jia Shu decided to try again and introduced himself a second time. He said that he is well known in Liangzhou. He worked with the government and studied many books on military tactics. Moreover, he taught Wei Liaozi for 10 years. When he was in power, he had to participate in many battles with the Yellow Turban rebels, and he even had to fight bandits. Will such a resume really not be enough? Cho Hen repeated once again that he did not want to accept him, and everything he listed is not experience. He doesn't need such a warrior, so let him get out of the way. Jiashu clearly did not expect such an answer. He thought, how can this be? How can I be an ordinary commander? Well, in that case, he has no choice. He will go to hell, but will still join his army, no matter the cost. He made another attempt and said that he had heard that Cho Hen did not have a strategist. A war cannot be won with numbers alone. Therefore, he urgently needs a strategist. Tio Hen asked Jiashu what he commands. He replied that he had heard that he became the commander of Fort Dakan. Cho Hen replied that 3 people were trying to take this fort at once: Xiangbei, Xiongnu, and Rong from the west. All it takes is one wrong move to have his skin pulled off and left to fry in the sun. But Jiashu took the words in his own way. He thought that the general did not want to send him to such a dangerous place, since he was very confident in him. But it is not important. As the great Confucius said, "Hear the Tao in the morning and die in the evening." He is ready to die right now to fulfill his dream. Cho Hen asked if it was true, and then grabbed Jiashu by the scruff of the neck. And he said that it really infuriates him when he hears about a dream from a schemer. Then let him talk about such an important dream. Cho Sun unexpectedly stood up for Jiashu. She said she just wanted to talk to him. Cho Hen tried to explain why Jiashu caused such anger. He said that those commanders who fought against the Yellow Turban Rebellion ruled the army like cattle. Even if he provided them with a winning strategy, it would still be ignored since he is from Western Liang. As a result, they almost always lost or simply ran away from the battlefield like mongrels with their tail between their legs. They always looked down on those who were from the 3 northern kingdoms. Jiashu decided to put in his 2 cents. He said that the size of the army does not matter to him. He just needs someone who will listen to his orders. You should not miss such an opportunity that is useful for both parties. Jiashu will test his capabilities, and Cho Hen's soldiers will be able to learn real tactics. After these words, Cho Hen easily lifted Jiashu and threw him to the ground, pressing him down well. He was very scared. His eyes opened wide, and he asked what Cho Hen was going to do. Tio Hen said that Jiashu can talk any kind of nonsense, but the lives of his soldiers are at stake. Does he really want to sacrifice their lives for the sake of his experience? Yes, he agrees to take a test that can show his tactics to the world. Cho Hen shouted, "Does he have the right to say that? Jiashu's insane strength has reached a level that others can only dream of. But how many people were able to survive after following orders?" Cho Hen admitted that a battle with limited tactics was much better than without it. But it is advisable to find an experienced and faithful advisor. Jiashu exclaimed, "Does he really think that truly experienced advisors will be able to find him themselves?" Cho Hen exclaimed, "Does he really want him to bow?" Cho Hen said that he knew people who resembled Jiashu. They always hide behind and pick up the leftovers in the hope of gaining their own benefit. There is no point in risking your life in battle to gain little benefit. Cho Hen again wanted to hear what was on Jiashu's mind. Jiashu expressed his dream. He wanted his name to be on the list of the greatest strategists in history. He promised Cho Hen that, using his tactics, he would be able to defeat absolutely any enemy. And after many victories, Jiashu's name will be carved on the diamond and no one will be able to erase it. Cho Hen asked if he really thinks that world fame can be gained by taking part in small battles with barbarians. Jiashu replied that this would only be the beginning, but this way you can get the necessary experience. The grandfather, the old man, and Cho Hen's assistant asked Jiashu why he needed this. He answered to shake the whole world. A war will begin that will reach the very heavens. Cho Hen understood what was the matter. Jiashu saw the full picture of the developments. He was simply waiting for the right moment and seemed to wait for it. Jiashu came across as an unpleasant enemy. But Cho Hyun remembered the words of Cho Sun, who said that you can take soldiers and brains from the enemy. If Jiashu can use his inherent shrewdness to serve Cho Heng, then good things might come out of it. Cho Hen thought that he could lead his enemies to the same helplessness in which he himself had recently been. He looked at Jiashu and said that he was willing to give him a chance. He will be able to serve under him and manage exclusively tactics and nothing else. If he does not demonstrate his abilities and does not justify himself, Cho Hen will simply cut off his head. If Jiashu is not sure, he can just leave. But he exclaimed that he was ready to happily serve with the general. Cho Hen turned to Assistant Ilu and asked him to provide a horse for Counselor Jia. But Cho Hen still thought that Jiashu was his enemy forever, even though he was now on the same side. Cho Hen apologized to the innkeeper for causing a scene. He said it was nothing. Cho Hen understood that he could not relax. If he does this, Jiashu will control him like a puppet. He needs to be careful. Cho Hen and his men mounted their horses and rode off to Mai. The Tang Ni army announced the return of the general. Cho Hen saw his people again and asked what interesting things happened during his absence. His people, who happily came out to meet him, said that nothing special happened, and they asked what kind of satellites were with him. However, one of them remembered that there was still one very urgent matter. Someone came from Changshan. Cho Hen said he didn't know anyone from there. The guest appeared before Cho Hen's eyes and exclaimed that the Binzhou army was full of bandits. Cho Hen asked who he was and how he dared to label his people. The uninvited guest shouted that Cho Hen should have protected the people. He stole his son, and as if that wasn't enough. Moreover, the man said that Cho Hen kidnapped a little girl. Then a young man appeared who had recently begun serving with Cho Hen, the same guy who demanded to fight not one-on-one, but with everyone at once. The man who appeared was his father. Zhao Yun exclaimed that it was a simple misunderstanding, and General Lu was not like that at all. His brother arrived with Zhao Yun's father. He pushed the guy aside, not allowing him to take a step. He said that his brother had insulted the entire army with his criminal acts. The father drew his sword, intending to punish his son. Cho Sun looked at Cho Hyun and said that she didn't understand at all what was happening. Cho Hen put his halberd forward and said, since the old man pointed his weapon at him in his own camp, he won't let him just leave. The men clashed in a stunning battle. Both were extremely strong and skilled, worthy opponents. Cho Hen's men watched this battle. Zhao Yun also watched. Everyone present understood that the two best fighters of Binzhou and Jizhou were facing them. It was something fantastic. Cho Hen's advantage was his youth. He looked at his opponent and said that he was probably just tired. Zhao Yun's father didn't like it. He should not allow the reputation of the Changshan spear to be tarnished by some thief like him. The enemy was amazed at how Cho Hen managed to predict his every move. He didn't understand how this was possible. When the men stopped opposite each other, Cho Hen asked, "Is his opponent ready for something else?" There was a silent question in the old man's eyes. Cho Hen made just one move, thanks to which the enemy was disarmed. He realized that the battle was lost. The winner is already known. Let his eldest son not discredit his name. The old man admitted that Cho Hen was a better spearman than he. His skills are the best in the entire Hebei province. But the family's tarnished reputation deserves death. Let Cho Hen finish this matter and kill him. The old man opened his clothes, exposing his chest. Cho Hen looked at him and asked in surprise, should he do this just because he defeated the decrepit old man? The enemy did not like this comparison. He shouted, how could he lose to such a bandit, ignorant and degenerate? Cho Hen, in turn, also raised his voice. He didn't like that he and his people were compared to bandits. Why did the old man decide that they were like that? He answered, what do you call someone who kidnaps people? Tio Hen looked at Zhao Yun. The guy shouted that he tried to explain everything, but no one listened to him. Then Zhao Yun's brother asked to explain the letter he was holding in his raised hand. How, after reading it, could you think that they are not bandits? Yilu saw this letter and his amazement knew no bounds. He thought it was about Changshan. And a couple of weeks ago this happened. He ended up in a tent city and was glad about it. But there was too much to do. He walked and thought about what he should tackle first. Gao Shun called out to him. He asked if Yilu was okay since he looked completely unwell. Yes, he replied that he was fine, but he has too much to do. That's why I asked for an apology. Gao Shun continued his questions. He noticed that Yilu was very exhausted. Maybe he could help him with something? Yilu was happy to accept help. Gao Shun and his men confirmed that they were ready to help. After all, they are very grateful to him. If it weren't for Yilu, they wouldn't be here. He asked Gao Shun if he could write letters. He replied that yes, although not ideally, but still. This was exactly what was required, since it was necessary to carry out an order from the foreman. And the order was this. A letter had to be delivered to Zhao Changshan's house, and they gladly agreed to do this. Cho Hen took the letter in his hands and approached Yil with it. He had questions. He asked to read to him the order that Cho Hen personally gave. There was nothing left for Yil to do. He picked up the letter and began to read. Leader of the Zhao clan. But apparently he was reading too quietly because Cho Hen asked him to read louder. Yilu raised his voice and read the next sentence. It said that they had his son Zhao Yun. We'll take good care of him. There was nothing more in the letter. Cho Hen grabbed Yilu by the scruff of the neck and started yelling at him. People were afraid that the commander would simply hit him and kill him. Yilu tried to justify that it was not him. But Cho Hen rightly asked, if not him, then who? Cho Hen invited an uninvited guest to his home. Wine and food were placed in front of him. The old man and Cho Hen sat opposite. The guest said an amazing thing. He swore on his honor that the old man whom Cho Hen had once met was the best weaponsmith, and his name was Chen Tai. The old man was upset that his secret was revealed. Cho Hen exclaimed, "If this is true, then he would like to get a new spear, and he hopes that the old man will be able to bind him." He told Cho Hen not to worry, and he always kept his word. In general, even without weapons, Cho Hen is extremely strong. Cho Hen wanted to object, but the old man continued. "Has he met the bastard with the big ears and the two brothers?" Cho Hen understood who we were talking about, the heroes of Ping Yuan. The old man said that they were the strongest he had ever seen. True, this all happened before meeting Cho Hen. Cho Hen shouted that it was him, and he was able to make weapons for them. The old man asked, "Was something wrong?" Cho Hen replied that there were many problems because of these weapons. The old man looked at him and asked him to stop whining. He then suggested that if Cho Hen brought him the material, the old man would make him a weapon faster than he could blink. The old man left them. Meanwhile, Zhao Yun's father decided to talk to Cho Hen. He turned to him and expressed deep gratitude for the mercy shown. He apologized for not respecting the general or his men. Cho Hen replied that he never had a family, but even he knows that people can be quite desperate when it comes to their children. Yes, he also made a mistake. Zhao Yun's father said that the general is very friendly, and he will be happy to host Cho Hen when he is in Changshan. Cho Hen said that he heard that the Zhao family has an excellent spear. He invited the boy's father to send some to him. Cho Hen promises to treat everyone equally, regardless of upbringing or ancestry. The man asked if Cho Hyun was sure about this. Tio Hen replied that it makes no sense for them to worship the wishes of Gongsun Zan or Yuan Shao just because the disciples would serve them as ordinary Zhubo. Father Zhao said that he did not know how to express his gratitude. When Cho Hen visits them, he will be able to look around and choose anyone. Cho Hen gladly accepted this offer. The man said that he believed in the general and also trusted him with his son Yun. Afterwards, he wished him luck and took his leave. Cho Hen also wished Sir Zhao good luck and advised him to be careful. Cho Sun sat and studied the letter addressed to Cho Hyun. It said that he was given an estate in Machi's place and 10 silver coins. But Cho Hen didn't understand the point and asked what it meant. Cho Sun said that he has now become a general of 2,000 people. And in the Dingxian camp, they will give him another 1,000 soldiers. He will have to defend the northwest of Binzhou. Jia Shu responded to this by saying that this is nonsense. Inspector Digna used tens of thousands of soldiers against the bandits, and he gives Cho Hen only 2,000 men to defend the north. Maybe he just doesn't like Cho Hyun. Cho Heng reminded that Jia Shu would like to use his skills, and he should not be surprised by this. Jia Shu made a request. He would like to go ahead and interview people nearby. He will come up with a plan that will shock Cho Hyun. Cho Hen decided to grant this request. He asked 2 of his men to accompany Master Jia. He will command their movements, so they can already get ready for the journey. Cheng Liang and Wei Tio Hen said that they only have 2 hours. During this time, they must collect the necessary things and prepare to march. To all the other people, Cho Hen made an announcement that they were going to the Dingxian camp. Jia Shu kept thinking about 2,000 people to defend the north. He must find a way to win. Jia Shu and his 2 companions approached the wall. He looked at her and was taken aback. These are ruins, not a wall. And they should protect against northern enemies? They say it hasn't been repaired for years. Jiu Shu leaned his hands on the wall and thought, if the stone wall is in such a terrible condition, then he is even afraid to imagine what condition the eastern fortresses are in. He looked at the map and realized that they would have to cope with 3 places, and only if they took into account the forts. And there are only 2,000 people for all this. He thought about what to do. Will we really have to divide all the fortresses to fight the enemies? But this is real madness. He only hopes that all the people have had good training. Cho Hen saw the soldiers being trained by the sergeant major. He said that every move they made exuded strength and discipline. This is truly elite. These soldiers turned out to be quite obedient. In any case, there are far fewer people in the camp than usual. The sergeant major reported that the inspector had taken 10,000 troops to cover the Huguan region. Cho Hen thought it was too much. But the foreman simply followed orders. Cho Hen turned to the foreman and said that his army was greatly exhausted, but he needed 1,000 of his soldiers. The general showed Cho Hen his 1,000 men. It was terrible. The foreman said that he himself could not believe it and read the order several times. The sergeant major always followed orders. He can provide Cho Heng with trained soldiers, but he refused because he understood that the foreman's strength was running out. Cho Hen suggested that he rest and he would watch the training. Cho Hen said that he was just curious what kind of people would be in his command. Therefore, the foreman need not worry about anything. The foreman left, and Cho-hen went to the people. He did not understand at all how to act and what to do in this situation. Cho-hen sat at the table with the foreman. He asked, "Doesn't the sergeant major know that these people are a little undisciplined? You obviously need to be stricter with them, because it's not for nothing that there are military rules." The foreman replied that these people had seen a lot when they were under the control of the inspector. They are not afraid of punishment. If Cho-hen tries to argue with them, they will attack him. The foreman could not understand at all why these people were given to Cho-hen. Then Cho-hen decided to ask how things were going with the officers. Cho-hen thought that if you gain their trust, people will listen. But the sergeant major said that the soldiers were collected from different places. Therefore, it will not be possible to find special leaders among them. Cho-hen exclaimed that this was all very bad. Too many people had already been lost in the battle with Wuguang. He doesn't even have veterans who can handle the new recruits. What should Cho-hen do with these slackers? Then the foreman asked if Cho-hen knew about the annual event with the recruitment of officers. Around this time, once a year, talented warriors from all over Bingzhou gather in this place. And they should already be here. Cho-hen exclaimed that he couldn't wait to go and see. In the Han Dynasty, anyone who wanted to become a government official had to be recommended by an inspector and an administrator. Much depended on the school and family. Talented people without special connections often sought out famous individuals in the Yuan or Gongxiang families. They wanted to serve with them as minor officers in the hope that one day they would be heard. But large families have always needed talent. All these circumstances made it possible to create a symbiosis between ordinary and influential people. This is how they helped each other. So in order to gain support from the Bingzhou nobility, Ding Yuan and Teng Chao opened the Dingxian camp so that public performances would be held here once a year. The very next day, the camp was filled with people. They were sent from different families all over Bingzhou. The purpose of all this was to find true leaders. Cho-hen showed the foreman two people he liked. Judging by their appearance, they weren't that bad. One of them was with a spear, the second with a halberd with a crescent. The herald made an announcement. Those who would like to become commanders should approach the red flag, and those who would like to become officers should approach the blue one. The one who interested Cho-hen walked up to the blue flag. Cho-hen exclaimed, "What a pity that he came to take a position in the administration." The winner was named Hu Man from Meiji Shengnu. This was the barbarian who managed to defeat 4 people. Nobody was interested in his skills. Cho-hen thought that to others this man was a simple savage. But if someone manages to defeat him, everyone will go over to him. The winner exclaimed, "Is there really no one left who would like to fight?" But such a daredevil was found. He introduced himself that his name was Li Xuan from Huozhe and he was ready to fight. Cho-hen looked and saw that the guy was very confident in himself. Is there really someone who can cope with the barbarian? The daredevil looked very strong. The battle has begun. The spectacle was simply amazing. Everyone understood that the daredevil was much stronger than he seemed. Besides, he had an ace up his sleeve. His strength and skill were amazing. But apparently something went wrong. Li Xuan lost. Hu Man was again named the winner. Hu Man noticed a guy with a halberd and shouted, "Did such a big guy really come just to tinker with papers? Maybe he'll take the smirk off his face and accept the challenge." But the guy replied that he did not want to fight, and he came here only for the position of an officer. Hu Man continued. He did not believe that the young man was scared. Is he just ready to hide behind the flag? He replied that if his halberd tasted blood, it would be impossible to stop it. Hu Man said that's enough talk. He was very infuriated by the look with which the guy with the halberd looked at Hu Man. It's as if Hu Man's strength is worthless, and in general he will get great pleasure when he himself gouges out the enemy's eyes. The young man with the halberd accepted the challenge. The opponents positioned themselves opposite each other. The young man with the halberd said that his name was Zhang Liao Wen Yuan from Ma Yi. Cho-hen exclaimed joyfully that he knew so. Zhang Liao looked extremely young, but if Tio-hen had added a beard to him, he would certainly have recognized him. But look, because he has no rights to claim it. A spectacular battle began. All you vile bastards of Xiongnu, die screaming. Zhang Liao has transformed into a very powerful opponent. Hu Man looked at his opponent and did not understand what was wrong with him. Cho-hen even began to doubt whether this was the man he knew. He's changed too much. Zhang Liao displayed incredible strength. However, Hu Man did not retreat from him. He even managed to inflict significant damage. Zhang Liao was seriously injured. For a moment he was blind. Hu Man was glad that he managed to wound the enemy. He even thought that the enemy was afraid since he was covering his eyes. However, this was completely wrong. Then Zhang Liao shouted "Huap" and dealt a crushing blow. Cho-hen looked and thought, could he really have made a mistake? This is definitely Zhang Liao. His height, face, huge halberd with a crescent. But was he so cruel and bloodthirsty before? Cho-hen remembered that he was always quiet and reasonable. The chief and Cho-hen watched the battle. Both understood that all this would not end well and one of them would die. But Cho-hen did not understand what to do. The foreman suggested that the fight should be stopped. But can they do it without getting punched in the face? Maybe you just need to choose the right moment. Zhang Liao made his opponent fly several meters away. But he quickly came to his senses and again prepared to repel the attack. However, Cho-hen himself intervened. He hit Hu Man down in the stomach and did it in such a way that he flew to the side. The defeated wrestler asked to be released and for Cho-hen to get off him. Otherwise he will kill. Ken Liao called Cho-hen a creature because he did not let him move. Cho-hen told Ken Liao that enough was enough. He asked how Cho-hen knew him. He said that he knew very well what Zhang Liao had to go through and what happened to his clan and the Xiongnu. Maybe he just wants revenge? He asked Cho-hen who he was. He simply said that his army was heading northwest tomorrow and would fight the Xiongnu warriors. Ken Liao exclaimed, "Is this really Lu Bu in front of him?" If he wants to take revenge for his clan, Zhang Liao will have the opportunity. He invited Zhang Liao to join him. It's morning. Cho-hen's army set out. Zhang Liao kept asking Tio-hen how he knew him. He said that if he joined him, he would find out. And if he refuses, then his family will again become a target of the Xiongnu as before. Then Cho-hen asked, "When it comes to the fight, who will remain? An entire Xiongnu army or a few living members of the Ni clan?" He gave Zhang Liao time to think about it. It was said that in Ma Yi, all the land belonged to the Ni clan. Anyone wanted to take possession of these lands, since they were the most fertile lands in all of Bingzhou. For the Xiongnu, Shufang and Ma Yi were the best targets for plunder. The founder of the Zan Empire, Liu Bang, lost in the campaign against the Xiongnu. The Khan Empire became an appendage of the Xiongnu and paid tribute. There was no one to protect Ma Yi. When Emperor Wu reigned, the heads of the Ni clan began a new campaign against the Xiongnu and deliberately surrendered to them. So they managed to create a real network throughout the Xiongnu. It was used for espionage, but all this did not help. The population began to treat Ni Yi's supporters very poorly. They called them the half-breeds of Hukan, and the Xiongnu began to send mercenaries for revenge, which was even worse. Zhang Liao's father changed his surname to Zhang. He had to run and hide from the Xiongnu. If Xiong had managed to find out about his past, his family would have been in danger again. Zhang Liao had a desire to kill Liu Bei right on the spot so that this information would not go further than him. But only he understood that Cho-hen had much better skills. Zhang Liao thought that dead people couldn't tell stories. Hu Man decided to tease Zhang Liao. He asked if he was ready to go to Dachang with them. Maybe he just wants to die quickly? Zhang Liao asked Hu Man why he was here. Maybe he's just a sick Xiongnu? Hu Man replied that he came specifically for Zhang Liao, and he can't pick it up and let it go. And next time he will definitely not lag behind, so Zhang Liao needs to prepare as best as possible. But Zhang Liao did not remain in debt. He said that they took Hu Manyu and kicked his ass, and he still says something here. Chu Sun turned to Cho Hyun. If they eat in Shufang, then he should know that... Cho Hyun remembered what Chu Sun said earlier. She was hinting at finding Sir Boji's whereabouts. Chu Song said that this is very important and will definitely be useful to them. Cho Hyun accepted the advice, but asked Chu Sun to stay inside as it was dangerous. Kai Yun was one of those who challenged the 10 obedient ones. He was the greatest scientist, but only those who are very stubborn in their beliefs. After some time, Cho-hen's men met with Jia Shu and the people accompanying him. They were glad to meet. Finally, you can stop and relax. Cho-hen immediately asked Jia Shu how everything went. He threw up his hands because he didn't know what to say. He reported that Gao Kui and Manyi Valley turned out to be mere ruins. Only Ji Lu found herself in normal conditions. Jia Shu, in turn, inquired about the condition of the soldiers. After this question, Cho-hen grabbed his head and said that it was better to see everything with his own eyes. Cho-hen showed him the 1,000 people given away. Most of them turned out to be old people, and according to the inspector, these people are capable of protecting the Northwest. Jia Shu looked at Tio-hen and thought, how could this happen? Maybe the inspector has so much confidence in Cho-hen and his abilities. Or does he simply want Lu Bu to be under his control? Tio-hen looked at Jia Shu, who had come up with some great idea. This was evidenced by his contented appearance. He said that yes, he has interesting thoughts, but before that, he must ask Cho-hen something. And it is important that he takes the questions very seriously. Jia Shu said that their main target is Ji Lu. Gao Kui is relatively close. Therefore, defending 2 forts will not be problematic. Cho-hen asked, what about the Manyi Valley? Do we need to divide the forces? Jia Shu said that since the army is small, It is impossible to divide the forces. Therefore, they can only hope that the enemies will not go there yet. Teo Hen was at first taken aback by these words, and then grabbed Jia Shu by the breasts and began to yell. He thought that Jia Shu was simply talking nonsense, that his task was to draw up a plan to protect himself from the barbarians, and if he failed, he could immediately leave him. Jia Shu began to make excuses. That's why he said he wanted to ask first. Cho Hen ordered him to get straight to the point. Jia Shu said that he would need power over the old soldiers. Cho Hen didn't understand why he needed this. Jia Shu promised that he could make them useful. It is only important to trust him. Cho Hen first thought for a few minutes, and then allowed Jia Shu to do what he wanted. But Jia Shu's requests did not end there. He pointed to one of the observation towers and said that they needed to be rebuilt. If this is done, they will be able to react instantly even if the enemies are able to cross the Great Wall. Cho Hen agreed that this made sense. He shouted to his men that from now on they would be repairing the surveillance towers. The soldiers received this news joyfully. He looked at what his people were doing and was horrified. The old people grumbled and were very slow. They communicated with each other and reasoned that barbarians are always fast and will be able to finish their business as soon as the first lantern lights up. And they really didn't like everything because they believed that they were forced to suffer from bullshit. Cho Hen could barely restrain himself from going out to them and not screaming. Jia Shu tried to stop him. He again asked to trust people to him. He decided to go out to them and greet them. Jia Shu went out to the old men and introduced himself appropriately. He said that he was a tactician in the Tang Ni army and was addressing the young heroes. This treatment surprised them because they were far from young in age. Jia Shu continued his speech. He said that General Lu Bu learned that most of the people were from Yangzhang and Shufang. Since there are already many people to repair the structures, they can count on a generous gift, 10 days off. Teo Hen heard what Jia Shu was promising and roared. What the hell is he doing? But the people were so happy about the news that they apparently did not pay attention to the general's anger. They threw their hats in the air, rejoicing at the unexpected vacation. They glorified the general. Cho Hen was simply shocked. People started dancing with joy. Apparently they haven't been on vacation for too long. But Jia Shu decided to interrupt their fun because he didn't finish speaking. He put his hand forward and asked to let him finish his speech. People stared at him with wide eyes. And Jia Shu continued. He said that the northern barbarians might soon cross the Great Wall, and people have enough experience to understand what will happen after this. Therefore, there is a small request for them. People immediately thought that they were being given a last vacation before inevitable death, that they will be sent as human shields, and therefore they are fed as before a knacker for slaughter. Immediately they started asking Cho Hen what was going on, but he himself didn't know, so he couldn't answer the question. Jia Shu hastened to reassure people that everything is not as they think. They are given rest because the general is confident that they are experienced soldiers who have fought a lot and do not need training. The management understands perfectly well what people have already gone through. Moreover, there is something that only the important and special like them can handle. Of course, they were pleased to hear that they were considered special and important. Jia Shu showed them the destroyed tower. People understood why it was needed, but did not understand the meaning of it all. People believed that the towers could give a feeling of hopelessness in the hope of salvation, which would not come. And they can only delay the inevitable. But Jia Shu thought differently. He said that this time it will be different, because now they have General Lu and his army, Tang Ni. People have already heard for sure that he and his army were able to defeat thousands of enemies, although his army was small and there were only a few hundred people in it. And it was not a myth, but the truth. Then he ordered the people to return home and tell everyone that they were under the protection of the general and his army. People should no longer be afraid of the light of the beacon. Now they will be able to rest and, if necessary, take cover. General Lu Bu will come and save everyone. People were incredibly surprised by all of the above, and in their eyes there was clearly visible hope that this would be the case. At the end of his fiery speech, Jia Shu wished everyone a pleasant journey and that they would meet again within 10 days. Cho Hen looked and thought that people no longer resembled balance. And Jia Shu was absolutely sure that now they would lead them to victory. Cho Hen asked Jia Shu if the motivation of protecting their families could help. But Jia Shu was confident that his plan would work as it should, and hastened to assure the general of this. Cho Hen thought that if the plan didn't work, someone's head would definitely fly off their shoulders. In fact, Jia Shu decided to send people home so that the general's name would take a place among the best people in Bingzhou. Previously, the people from the 4 northern command posts believed that they were just expendable material and nothing more. They believed this because the Binzhou army would never send anyone to defend it until several villages were destroyed. But now everything has changed, and people understand that someone needs them. The soldiers continued to praise and honor General Lu Bu. 2 weeks later, the travelers finally reached the river, where they were able to drink enough themselves and water their tired horses. It was a desert. No one thought that there would be such an oasis in it. The robbers filled their flasks with water and sat on the shore thinking about capturing the area. They were sure that the observation towers would not help in any way, and there would not be enough people to resist. One of them said that according to rumors there were changes, and the enemy was able to defeat an army 10 times larger. But the second interlocutor laughed and said that he did not believe in these fairy tales. But something didn't go according to plan. The peaceful rest was broken. The robbers realized that they were ambushed. Their horses and their belongings rushed away. This was the first time this happened to them. There were several attackers, but one of them was with a halberd with a crescent. It was Zhang Liao. He mistook the robbers for the people of the Xiongnu, so he was especially merciless towards them. Chou Hen, along with his other people, watched what was happening from a hillock. He was pleased with the operation. The plan was a complete success. Tio Hen never thought that Zhang Liao was capable of attacking those who were vulnerable. Zhang Liao peered into the distance and noticed something. Chou Hen asked who he saw, maybe enemies. Zhang Liao confirmed that she is, but he is quite difficult. In fact, there was not 1 or a dozen people there, but an army of thousands. Chou Hen ordered the people to pack their things and go up to his hill. They stood up and asked what was the matter. Chou Hen ordered preparations for retreat. He said that they would take the route that Jia showed. He once said that if there are a lot of opponents, they should be lured to a certain place. There they will have a very unpleasant surprise in the form of an ambush. Chou Hen was asked, maybe he would like to just retreat. He replied that he was thinking about it and that the soldiers should be divided. Chou Hen was asked what they would do, since there were several thousand opponents. Chou Hen replied that they would do everything as usual and do what works best. Morning has come. The remaining opponents stopped at the river where the battle had previously taken place. The commander-in-chief believed that a meeting with the vanguard would take place at this place, but no one was there. His assistant replied that scouts had been sent along this route. They were supposed to wait here for the main forces. However, there were no scouts or main forces. There were too few people. They, like the predecessors they killed, greedily drank water and watered the horses. They believed that the scouts simply had not finished searching the area. One of the people leaned down to drink water and saw a dead man. He immediately screamed. The commander ordered the find to be reported to him. Then it turned out that the dead man was one of their people. He was among those same scouts. The commander immediately ordered everyone to remain on alert and monitor anything suspicious that was happening around. You also need to hurry up and pass on the information to others. However, as soon as he finished his speech, the situation around him changed dramatically. There was an explosion, and enemies appeared out of nowhere. They realized that an ambush had been prepared for them here, and they urgently needed to flee because the commander was already wounded. Chou Hen whistled, thereby giving the command to his men to advance. The opponents noticed the approaching army and were frightened. Chou Hen told his men that they would not be here for long. Their tactics: attack and retreat. But before they leave, you need to try to kill as many opponents as possible. This command was executed. The commander did not expect such a development of the scenario. He essentially did not understand what was happening around him. He gave the order to retreat in order to return again after regrouping. Only one young fighter blocked the road to retreat. The enemy commander was taken aback by such impudence and shouted that the young man would die right away because of his own arrogance. The commander, sitting on a horse, rushed towards the warrior, confident that he could easily cope with him. But the young man dealt the fatal blow first. He was alone against everyone, but easily dealt with all opponents, although they were said to be too strong. Chen Tai forged a new weapon for Chou Hen and showed it to him. He said it would take a few weeks to make a suitable weapon, but for now he could use the one on offer. Chou Hen saw the halberd and was amazed, because the blacksmith made it in a hurry. We must give him credit. It turned out to be much more useful than it initially seemed. Chou Hen was informed that it would be necessary to finish it, since the main enemy army was moving in their direction. Chou Hen gave the command to the first squad to retreat and head to the marked point. But he was also informed that Zhang Liao was still there alone. He couldn't be left. Therefore, Chou Hen said that Chen Lian would now be in charge, and Chou Hen himself would catch up with him later. Chen Lian shouted at the people to follow him. Zhang Liao was able to kill many opponents. He truly was fearless and strong. The enemies decided to avenge the death of their comrades. Their commander said that no one should be left alive. They mounted their horses and rushed off. But Chou Hen appeared on their way. He wanted to take Zhang Liao away from there. But Zhang Liao had other plans. He didn't want to leave. Zhang Liao shouted for Tio Hen to get out of his way. Chou Hen was not going to leave him alone, so he hit him to sober him up. He said, "Stop fooling around." Zhang Liao sat down and grabbed his head. He said he regretted what happened. Tio Hen looked at him and wondered if this was the Zhang Liao he knew well before. The enemy army was rapidly approaching. Chou Hen saw that there were too many of them. He turned to Zhang Liao and told him to stay for a while. There will definitely be work for him now. The opponents were rapidly approaching. The commanders shouted to the soldiers that they urgently needed to catch the Khan's bastards and skin them alive. No one should survive. We need to avenge our dead brothers. But they did not expect that the opponents were very strong. Only one Chou Hen is worth many. He decided to delay the opponents a little and pulled the bowstring. But this did not stop the opponents. The horses still rushed forward at full speed. Then he pulled the string again. This time the arrow reached its target. While the general was studying the results of his activities, one of his men turned his attention to what was ahead. They were approaching the desired location where the ambush was set up. Jia Shu was already waiting for them. He stood on the top of the hill and observed the situation. Chou Hen hoped that his plan could work. The enemies noticed that the opponents were heading into the forest. They are clearly planning something, but what? Maybe they set up another ambush there, but there are much more of us than them. Chou Hen and the people went further and further into the forest. Jia Shu gave the command to blow the horn. The enemies decided that Chou Hen and the people did not want to meet them face to face. Surely they are just playing for time to evacuate the peasants. We need to finish off the remaining ones and be done with it. The commander gave the command to grab all the peasants and skin them so that they could feel what real humiliation was. Then the command to attack was given. Chou Hen kept thinking about the meaning of the operation. This is not the best place for a battle for an ambush. Yes, enemies can be taken by surprise, but there are many more of them. Maybe he just overestimated Jia Shu? Oh, I wouldn't like to believe it. Zhang Liao heard a sound and immediately asked Tio Hen if he heard it. He thought he heard the sound of metal on metal, but what could that mean? But these sounds were not like blades or spears. Jia Shu really thought of everything. People were stationed in the forest. They held the chains and had to pull them at the right time. When the time came, Jia Shu gave the command to pull. The chains tightened, everything in the forest began to move. The riders fell from their horses, but they quickly recovered. They saw that the chains were stretched everywhere and could not understand what it was. It turned out to be simply impossible to move. They didn't understand how this could be true. Those who set up this ambush decided to go on the attack. They must remember all the suffering they had to endure. There must be a full price for everything. Revenge for the suffering of the people will be realized. With this cry, the rebels rose and took up arms. Since the enemies were immobilized, they became easy prey. Those same old men, armed with pikes, went to break through. They were given orders to kill everyone who resisted. However, not everyone was killed. Those who were late survived. They looked at the corpses and thought that even if they had arrived on time, nothing would have changed. Although maybe there would be fewer corpses. But lately all they've been doing is burying the dead. They noticed those who were the cause of this massacre and entered into battle with them. The commander shouted that it was necessary to destroy every single one of them. If the enemies are not stopped here, then all sacrifices and efforts will be meaningless. Chou Hen looked at all this and thought, are these the same old idlers in front of him? What he saw impressed him very much because they were so different from those he had seen before. He also admired Jia Shu, who orchestrated it all. However, some survived the massacre. One of them thought that they were attacked by warriors, but they were just old men. He noticed one of the old men and decided to kill him. He said that he would be happy to do him a favor and personally deliver his head to his home. And first he will definitely show it to the old man's family, and then he will kill everyone. He furiously shouted, "Die," and was ready to kill the old man, but then Zhang Liao appeared and saved him. Chou Hen ordered the officers to take positions and finish off the bastards before they came to their senses. Chou Hen shouted that the hero's efforts must not be allowed to go to waste. He turned to Jia Shu and expressed his gratitude to him for the fact that they were able to kill thousands of enemies, take hundreds of prisoners, their food and horses. Moreover, although there were losses, they were small. Chou Hen thanked Jia Shu for choosing him, but Master Jia, in turn, believed that he was unworthy of such words and he should be grateful for being given such a great chance. Jia Shu said that it is not over yet. The general was surprised and asked what they forgot to do. Master Jia, with burning eyes, said that you need to strike while the iron is hot. It was he who proposed collecting all the food stolen from enemies and distributing it where the population was starving, for example, in Shofeng and Yunzhong. The story of how the general dealt with the Xiongnu and helped those in need quickly spread in Binzhou. Over time, the name of the general and his army became known throughout Binzhou. The gates of Binzhou Castle were open. Inspector Binzhou Ding Yuan was informed of the situation, but he did not believe everything that was happening. He was told that the people of Binzhou had built a shrine for General Lu Bu, but he was still a living person. People must have just gone crazy. But this was not enough. People erected a monument next to the sanctuary. The inspector realized that this was not all the news and asked to continue. He said people were saying that the era of the inspector was long over. The inspector had already become old and weak, but Lu Bu, unlike him, was still young and full of strength. These words made him very angry. He pushed the messenger away and shouted that people were ungrateful because he had done so much for them. What right do they have to say such things? If things remain like this, then the general's ambitions will be able to consume even Ding Yuan. Something urgently needs to be done to stop all this. He thought and thought about what to do in this case. Then he took the parchment and began to write something in it. His idea was to convince all the administrators of the northern commanders to write letters of recommendation for General Lu Bu. Because of this, the inspector will have an incredible desire to keep Lu Bu in line, and therefore he will definitely send him somewhere that will reduce his effectiveness. And then the northern regions will be devastated by barbarians. Where did the bright young hero go? Now, instead of him, there is only an old man who is blinded by power. A few weeks later, the general spoke with Master Jia. Thanks to the major victory over the Xiongnu, a favorable wind arose for them. Everyone really praised the general and his army. Now many young people from Bingzhou want to serve in his army. Master Jia said that this is great, but there is one problem. Now there are not enough veterans and officers who could lead the new recruits. But the general had an idea about this. Master Jia wanted to hear her. He remembered the incident with Zilong's father. Master Jia remembered this incident very well and immediately understood what he was talking about. The spear practitioners from the Zhao Chanshan family. Indeed, they will make excellent officers. The general decided to go there immediately. Why hesitate? He left the castle and promised that he would return soon. After a while, he arrived in Jishu. He was warmly received by the owner. He was immediately invited to come through. The owner of the castle asked if there were any problems along the way, since the general came here for the first time. But General Lu Bu replied that there were no problems. The path turned out to be very simple thanks to Zilong, who accompanied him. The owner of the castle inquired about the purpose of the general's visit. He replied that his army had grown a lot recently. Many new people have appeared, and he needs those who could lead them. He remembered their last conversation and decided to see if he could take people into his army as officers. Students would be perfect for him. The owner of the property laughed. The general remembered their conversation. He said that he would love to show him people, but he was worried about one thing. If his men were immediately given officer ranks, it could tarnish the general's own reputation. As a result, he may be accused of favoritism. So he proposed a slightly different solution. One can invite famous personalities from the surrounding area and ask his disciples to perform in their presence. If the general himself chooses those who deserve the most praise, no one can doubt his choice. The general liked this idea and said that he was happy with everything. Therefore, he entrusts the organization of all this to him. At the same time, the general was thinking about the following. If you think carefully, Jizhou will become an excellent springboard for Yuan Shao in the future. There is a lot of new talent to be found here, and if the general takes advantage of this opportunity, he will be able to get good benefits. The commissioner of Xiaoyang County, Zhu Lui, was informed that an invitation to a feast had arrived from Zhao. The master exclaimed, "After all, Master Zhao's 60th birthday has already passed. Then for what reason is this feast being organized?" The messenger said he had no more specific information. The master sighed heavily and asked, "Does he have to be present?" But the messenger replied that the decision was his alone. But one day Master Zhao rendered him an invaluable service and saved him. This must be remembered. The master pointed to the sky and said how brightly Beiluosamen shines, although autumn has not yet arrived. Perhaps this is a bad omen. The messenger said that Beiluo was showing the way to the big wall, and Shimen represents the army. He thought that maybe the glow meant good luck. But the master thought, why did he teach him such useless things? After thinking a little, he decided that he would suddenly be able to find his place in the army. Therefore, in the morning he will go on a trip and we need to prepare everything for him. The messenger bowed and told the master not to worry about anything. He will keep an eye on everything and make sure the carriage is clean. The next morning, invited guests began to arrive at the Jizhou estate. Noble Bo arrived first. Master Zhao greeted him happily. Noble Bo said that he hasn't been feeling very well lately, so it's hard for him to go out. But Master Zhao replied that this was nonsense. Noble Bo looked great and seemed quite healthy. Then it was reported that Noble Ju had arrived from Xianyang. Master Zhao and Noble Bo turned around in surprise. Apparently, they did not expect him to accept the invitation. Noble Ju greeted the owner of the estate and his guest. They exchanged greetings and standard questions. Those present looked at the new arrival and thought, "Isn't this the Bolin County judge who was appointed by Mao Kai at the age of 20? And he's on the wrong side now." Master Ju said to Master Zhao, "I didn't expect that there would be another invitation this year." Then Master Zhao explained the reason for the gathering. This time, an important figure from Bingzhou arrived. Therefore, experts were assembled to evaluate. Master Zhao hopes that his students will take advantage of this opportunity and thereby become popular. Master Ju was somewhat taken aback that there was an important figure from Bingzhou this time. He thought, "Isn't this the place where the rumors about the man came from?" Everyone was looking forward to the start. But while the celebration was going on, it was suggested that they familiarize themselves with the details. Master Zhao came out to the people and said, "Today is a wonderful day for all members of the Zhao estate, and it is a great honor for him that the best people of Jizhou came to their estate to celebrate the event. Several decades ago, they began to accept students who were not members of the Zhao family. The master is proud of all his students. Everyone is skillful, noble, ambitious. But the master could not provide them with a prestigious background because this is what is valued in many armies. But today, he can thank the heavens that there is someone who willingly traveled all the way from Bingzhou to come here and see if there are those who are worthy to join his army, given the skills." And then he introduced General Lu Bu of Bingzhou. People looked at him with incredible amazement. They had heard a lot about this man and about his exploits, about how the Xiongnu and Wuhan were defeated. The general, in turn, introduced himself to the people. He said that his name was Lu Bu Fengxian, and he was the head of the Tani army, in charge of the northwestern front of Bingzhou. Today, together with the guests present here, he will watch the demonstrations of the Zhao family warriors, and he vows that anyone who can prove their worth will get a good place in his army. Therefore, he asked the guests, if they consider someone outstanding, let them applaud. Master Zhao announced the start of the competition. Everyone must take their positions. The warriors took up their weapons and began to demonstrate their skills. Then General Lu Bu entered the platform and asked all participants to demonstrate how they could handle the Jin spear. Immediately there was an incredible buzz around, as Master Zhao noted. Suddenly a new participant appeared. He said that he, the master of the spear, was not invited to the celebration, but he will be happy to show everyone who is the strongest here. But spears were immediately pointed at the newcomer. The soldiers demanded that he give his name and drop his weapon. But the people were stopped by Master Zhao. He said that confronting one person in large numbers is simply not right, and he ordered everyone to move away from him. The soldiers obeyed the order. He then told the intruder that he hardly knew him, and so I asked what the reason was. The guest replied that he had come to demonstrate his strength to the Zhao family and prove that he was the strongest in Hebei. Master Zhao exclaimed that he saw how much this man wanted to fly, but he did not know at all how scary the sky was. But he is ready to fight him, so he demanded to bring him a spear. Master Zhao tried to stop his son, Zilong. He said it was wrong to kill a fly with a sledgehammer. Zilong himself asked for permission to fight him. He himself wants to show him the strength of the spearmen of the Zhao family. However, here the general himself entered the argument and said that he would do it himself. After all, it was he who asked for a celebration, but the fun was ruined, so he can't just stand by and do nothing. The unexpected guest mistook the general for a big guy who did not have any special skills. Yes, he seems to be a big problem, but he asked him to step aside. If he is not the head of the Zhao family, then he cannot be his opponent. The general exclaimed, "Just now the young man said that he was the strongest, but now he is simply running away from the battle." He exclaimed that this was not so, but the general found this all unconvincing. The general said that the young man could never reach his level. This was specifically said. After these words, the guest decided to join the battle. All the soldiers looked at them. The battle was spectacular, but the young man was clearly weaker than the general. To provoke him even more, the general said that the young man would not even be able to become the head of the district. The young man went on the attack, but the general easily dodged it. But he noted that the young warrior showed more than before. But this was clearly not enough. The general decided to test him to the fullest. So he took a stand and told the warrior to try not to die. The unknown warrior repelled the attacks as best he could, but he was clearly weaker. The general seemed to be mocking him all the time and trying to tease him. He said that the young man clearly did not have the strength to resist him. The young man held on with all his strength. Beads of sweat appeared on his face, perceiving his opponent as the devil. The general was concentrated as much as possible on the battle. He thought the fighter had a very strong physique, and he recognized him. Long ago, he was too dependent on Yuan Shao, who was afraid of Cho Hen and never spoke to the point. He peered at the enemy's facial features and did not understand how he could call himself the strongest of Hebei. The young man believed that the enemy simply did not underestimate him, so he tried to show all his skills. The general made some sudden movement, from which the young warrior's weapon jumped out of his hands. It quickly rushed towards Master Zhu, who was peacefully regaling himself and did not suspect anything. Master Zhao noticed this and tried to warn Master Zhu about the danger. Master Zhu pulled out his sword, and in the blink of an eye he broke the spear flying at him in half. The general noticed how good Master Zhu's reaction was and how accurate all his movements were. He stared at him in amazement. Master Zhao immediately rushed to Master Zhu and asked if everything was okay with him. He assured that there was absolutely nothing to worry about. Master Zhu was fine with coming to Jizhou. The young man still could not accept his defeat and the fact that he had lost his spear. The general made only one powerful and accurate blow, thanks to which the enemy was knocked down. He stood over it and was pleased with the result. Master Zhao approached the general and asked if everything was okay with him. The general stood up, shouldered the injured enemy, and asked Master Zhao if he could take this guy with him. Master Zhao certainly gave permission. The young man's hands were tied and he was put on a horse, and together with the general and his people, he had to set off. They drove for quite a long time. The prisoner looked very tired and pitiful because he still could not believe his defeat. He didn't understand what was happening at all and kept trying to find out from the general. But the general just grinned and all the time seemed to be trying to incite the prisoner. And he in turn did not like too much that he was called the strongest in Hebei. In the end, the general decided to inquire about his real name. The prisoner reluctantly said that his name was Zhang He. The general thought that he knew it was Zhang from Binzhou. Zhang was still worried about his own future fate. The general asked him a question that made him think. He asked, "Did he fight for glory?" Zhang thought and answered, "He wanted to run away to become successful." Zhang told him a story. During the Yellow Turban Rebellion, when the army was trying to stop them all over the world, one thoughtful person from the Zhou family received a high rank. This was because he was under the leadership of a famous general. The general first asked him, "Did he provoke the disease during the uprising?" Zhang said it was his doing, but because of this, he could not even become an assistant to the general. His family had a very low status, and he himself had no backstory. That's why he wanted to become the strongest in Hebei. He believed that this would help him find a strong position. The general also asked where he wanted to go, but Zhang said that it did not matter. Previously, the Zhao family sent many people on errands, but no one managed to get a lasting promotion. It turns out that skills don't really matter. During the day, he practiced martial arts all the time, and at night he studied military books, but all efforts were in vain. Then the general asked Zhang. Perhaps he would like to become his assistant. He is always ready to give a chance to those who have the right skills. He also asked, maybe Zhang would go with him to Binzhou. Zhang definitely did not expect such an invitation. He asked who he had the honor of talking to. The general replied that he was the leader of the Bingzhou Vanguard Army, and his name was Lu Bu Fengxian. Zhang had heard a lot about the famous general. He thought that if the rumors were true and he was a true hero, then defeat would make sense. Now he will not be able to achieve anything on his own, and he will need the opportunity to earn achievements, as well as gain skills under the wing of a famous person. Therefore, he will gladly take advantage of the opportunity that arises. At this time, the general stood and thought about his own things. He thought since he was here, he could take Yang Liang and Wen Chou away from Yuan Shao, but finding them won't be easy. But the situation is not too critical because Master Zhu is with him. The general expressed his admiration for Master Zhu and asked for forgiveness for what happened. The master said that there was no need to worry, since he did not receive a single wound. The general admired the level of swordsmanship because he was able to deflect the blow of a spear, and he wanted to learn as much as possible about this technique. By the way, the general didn't know that the master didn't really like talking to strangers. Master Zhao believed that when Yuan Shao had trust, he always felt there was a catch. Master Zhu was a former district judge, but for personal reasons he had to go into hiding. However, he has always been of great benefit, and if not for Master Zhu's decision, he would still have to engage in vagrancy. And Master Zhu believed that Master Zhao helped him more. Master Zhao looked at Master Zhu. He admitted that he was not only a talented person with excellent fighting skills, but also very respectful. Master Zhao generally believed that until the world changes, the situation will not change. And he decided to tell the general about the bad situation regarding Master Zhu. He said that the official who had once recommended the master had raised an army to get rid of the eunuchs. But he failed. All those involved were punished. Many thought that Master Zhu would also get it, and he would be in danger. Then Master Zhang asked the general, maybe he'll take Master Zhu with him. The general didn't think for a long time since such an opportunity came up and he was even asked, then he simply had to take advantage of it. But apparently Master Zhu himself did not quite like this idea. He even wanted to give it up. But Master Zhao, this is a great chance. Master Zhao said, since such a wonderful chance has come, maybe it's still worth taking advantage of it and moving on. In addition, he is completely confident that General Lu Bu will be able to protect if necessary. Master Zhu accepted this request and was forced to agree with all the arguments. The general swore that he would protect him. When Master Zhu rode his horse, he thought that everything was no coincidence. No wonder he saw a bright star in the sky. It was an omen. It is unknown how long the travelers were traveling, but they heard something strange. The general stopped his horse and asked what it was. One of his men expressed confidence that they were Haitian bandits. They happen to be in this area quite often. They may turn out to be raging outcasts or ordinary people. Then the general asked Zhang He a question. He asked if he could fight on horseback. Zhang He answered in the affirmative. The general ordered the army to move forward to find out the situation. They spurred their horses and galloped along the river. There really were bandits on the opposite side. One of them was holding a girl tightly. He ordered her to close her mouth and not make a sound. But even if she screams very loudly, no one will come to help. The robbers heard the horses neighing and became thoughtful. None of them rode horses. They realized that they were officers, but the robbers were too self-confident and believed that they were much stronger than the officers. Therefore, if they show up, they will readily demonstrate the possible consequences. The appearance of the general was unexpected for them. They even decided that they saw ghosts in broad daylight. The general and Zhang He seemed so scary. They asked each other who it was and what was going on, but no one knew the answer. The general attacked the robbers like a kite and spared no one. The enemy called for help in fear. Since there were only two attackers, the robbers, and these were the black bandits of Haishan, believed that they could easily cope with the uninvited guests. The general said that they themselves were going to certain death, since they did not know how to fight at all. There was a powerful explosion, from which many robbers suffered. Those who survived were almost crying. The survivors shouted to others to run for their lives, since there were no people in front of them. But it was all in vain. Zhang He was really good with weapons and fought well on horseback. Another army emerged from the forest. Zhao Yun shouted that he would gladly punish his enemies in the name of heaven itself. The general watched Zhao Yun's transformation with pleasure. He looked very young, but he certainly had talent and behaved very believably as a soldier. Zhang. He stood there and thought that 16-year-old Zhao Yun was much stronger than him. It's hard to believe that at such a young age you can be so inspired. There are so many talented people. Zhang. He thought how good it was that he followed the general. One of the robbers tearfully asked Zhao Yun for mercy. He was ready to give up if only he would be spared. He even promised that he would no longer be a bandit. Zhao Yun spared him. He said that he must surrender to the troops and pay for his sins, and he should never take up arms again. The robber was glad that he got off so easily, but he had a knife hidden in his bosom. And when Zhao Yun turned his back to him, he took out a weapon to strike. Fortunately, the general was nearby, so the insidious plan failed. The robber paid for this with a severed hand. The general told Zhao Yun that he was too young to die like that. He then showed something to Zhao Yun. He pointed to the destroyed village and the mountains of corpses. It was all the hands of robbers. The general said that these animals simply cannot obey people, and we must always remember that just a little bit of inattention can cost your life. The one-armed robber did not consider himself guilty of anything. He called the general and his men bastards and said that he would gladly cut off their heads. The general could not stand it for long and finished off the robber. He ordered Zhao Yun to look around carefully and see if there was anything left. Almost at the same moment, the general heard a menacing shout. Someone called him and the soldiers thieves and asked how they could do this. The general and Zhao Yun looked at the approaching people and could not determine who was in front of them. They were not like the Haishan bandits. The general ordered Zhao Yun to stay with the army while he went to meet the new guests. Strangers still called him a thief and demanded to show himself. But the general did not like this treatment very much. He got a good look at the unexpected guest. He was a red-faced man with a bushy beard and thick mustache. When Cho Hen returned to the past, he only thought about one thing, whether he could kill future enemies now. But this is the lot of the weak and completely wrong. But he also believed that he had an obligation to prove himself on the battlefield. Therefore, he deliberately waited and prepared for a meeting with future enemies. The new enemy perceived the general as a thief and was ready to cut off his head. The general did not like being called a thief. Therefore, he decided to enter into battle with a new opponent. The battle was very spectacular and tiring. Zhao Yun looked at this battle and could not believe that these were ordinary people fighting among themselves. His body simply trembled just from the sound of their spears colliding. It was as if he understood that if he took a step closer to them, he could easily die. Who is this man with a spear who managed to anger the general so much? The warriors took a short break. In addition, the general was slightly wounded. The new enemy admitted that the general's skills were quite good for a thief. In response to the general's assurances that he was not a thief, the man exclaimed that he did not believe it, because he had already killed so many people. The general exclaimed that the enemy simply believes what he wants, and it is impossible to communicate with him. After a short break, the battle continued. The man did not like being scolded by some thief. The general managed to make some too fast movement, which the enemy was unable to warn and suffered slightly. Zhao Yun continued to watch them. He thought that the general's opponent was a little afraid of him, although he was very good. And in general, how did the general manage not to hit the enemy's neck, since there were so many excellent opportunities for this? The general thought that now he was clearly younger and much more experienced, compared to those times when he fought against 3 guys. Now he definitely surpasses the enemy in strength, but for some reason he can't cope with him. Zhang He, who also watched the battle, said that the difference between the horses also affected the outcome of the battle. If not for this, the general, thanks to his skills, would have won long ago. If you look closely at your opponent's horse, you will notice that it is black, but has white hair on its ankles. The enemy had not an ordinary horse, but a mourner. It is said that she, like the horse of King Mu Wan of Zhou, ran through the mountains as if they were mere plains. That's why she's so good. If the battle had been between people, it would have already ended. But while they are on horses, it is more reminiscent of a fight between 4 people. Zhang He and Zhao Yun still stood and watched the battle of the 2 titans, and they still tried to demonstrate their skills in battle. By the way, both were incredibly good. The enemy did not let up and continued to call the general a thief. It felt like he wanted him to show him his entire night, which is why he provoked him. True, the general did not lag behind in this regard. He kept repeating the words of his enemy that he would cut off his head, but at the same time he himself ran away, and his red face gets redder and redder. For a second it seemed to him that the general's spear had become longer, but this could not be. The enemy simply used new tactics. He pretended to retreat, increased his distance, and struck again. He realized that in front of him was not an idiot, but a good tactician. After all, the outcome of the entire battle often depends on such little things. He's very talented. Can such people be thieves? The general kept looking at the enemy and thinking about what to do in this situation. He really wanted to end the battle as quickly as possible, but he understood that then the enemy would retreat. If he had a red hair, everything would probably be different. The enemy apparently gathered all his forces and prepared to attack again. The general was somewhat surprised by this, as he thought that he would try to escape. The general found everything that was happening funny. He raised his halberd again and prepared to repel the attack. The opponents significantly reduced the distance between themselves, but were still on horses. However, they didn't just stand there and look at each other. Each one spurred his horse, and the battle moved on. Each wanted to kill the other before he got close. The bearded man, flashing his eyes and waving his weapon, threatened the general that it was clearly the end for him. The general managed to push the enemy away quite strongly. He thought how strong the enemy was in front of him, simply with superhuman strength. He felt how much force the general put into his blow, and this fact made it clear to him that he could easily lose against such a strong opponent. But even though his opponent was too strong, he still considered him a thief, an ordinary thief, and such an opponent, even if too strong, could never lose under any circumstances. He put all the force he could muster into the subsequent blow. The opponent's halberds seemed to be intertwined with each other. Zhang He and Zhao Yun addressed the soldiers who were accompanying the bearded man. They said that they not only dared to call the master a thief, but also decided to vilely interfere in the duel. And Zhang, he even said, he doesn't know what squad they are from, but if they die today, they obviously won't mind. The opposing general looked menacingly at his soldiers. He did not order them to interfere in the course of the battle, and he clearly did not like this self-will. But his soldiers replied that if there were no thieves in front of them, then there was no point in fighting. Nevertheless, the battle continued. At some point, the bearded man turned around and, together with his men, galloped away from the general. The latter did not like this, because he was ready to continue the battle, and at that moment, the bearded man finally decided to introduce himself. He turned to the general and shouted to him that his name was Guan Yu. Let him remember this name well, because the time will come when he will still cut off his head." But the general decided to introduce himself. He shouted after him his name. He said that he would be easy to find if Guan Yu decided to finish what he started today. He is the owner of the border army in Bin province, so he will be quite easy to find. The general will always gladly accept the challenge thrown at him. Guan Yu and his soldiers galloped away. While they were driving, he kept thinking that he had met an excellent opponent, and he didn't understand why he hadn't heard of this hero before. If he had not had his Gondao, then who knows how this battle would have ended. Our story moved to the northwest gate of Bin province, where the general's military base is located. The general returned to his domain. The blacksmith examined the halberd made for him. He thought that if he had hit her on a rock, she would obviously have been in better condition. And the general, in turn, thought that if Guan Yu had such a weapon, he would easily break it in half. The blacksmith guessed who the general managed to meet. It was one of the Yu prefecture brothers. The general believed that the old man was to blame for everything, who could only do everything well for his lop-eared brothers. The old man admitted that the brothers had meteorite ore. What if the general had such a rarity? But where can I get it? The blacksmith considered that this was clearly not his problem. Since the general himself cannot get this material, then neither can he, the blacksmith. Then the general decided to show off the big sword that he had recently stolen. Maybe something can be done with it. If this is a really good sword, then high-quality ore was clearly used to make it. The blacksmith thought that this was obviously some kind of joke, because you couldn't take and melt down the emperor's sword. The old man thought for a while, but decided that the idea was not as good as it might have seemed initially. But the general was sure that he would not use this sword anyway, so he did not mind giving it for melting down. Suddenly a noise was heard from the yard. The general and the blacksmith stopped talking and began to listen. One of the soldiers looked in and said that a group was approaching with the flag of the imperial court. The general was surprised by the appearance of this group. Why did they arrive so unexpectedly and from such a distance? The group and the crew entered the yard. The general looked at this group with great surprise. The carriage stopped and a young guy got out. People around looked and did not understand what was happening. They also could not understand why they were there. The arrival turned to the general. He asked, "Is he Lu Bu Fenxian, the owner of the border army?" He replied that yes, that's him. But what's going on? The arrival said that he was a eunuch and had a message from the imperial court. Jia Shu was quite surprised by this. He thought that this young eunuch came from some very important person who could not come in person. The main thing is that the news is not bad. The young eunuch extended his hand with a scroll. He said that he had orders from the emperor of the Han dynasty, the son of heaven. Everyone should definitely kneel and then listen to the message. Jia Shu knelt down as ordered, but the general did not. He was still standing upright. Jia Shu noted that since there was an order, the general should obey it. The general finally heard what was required of him and knelt down. He understood that even in his previous life, he had not had to experience this. When he received a new position, Dong Zhuo immediately delivered orders, so they didn't know anything. Jia Shu not only knelt down, he also rested his head on the ground. He asked the eunuch to be merciful and listen. Jia Shu said that there is someone next to him who does not know the meaning of the holy paper. They are ready to separately show their gratitude, but just don't let them be accused of disrespect. The eunuch looked at them and agreed to talk about gratitude later. And now he will continue. Jia Shu demanded that the general repeat after him word for word, and said that he, General Lu Bu, would receive this order. The general obeyed, and said what was asked of him. The young eunuch continued. Those who remained in the northern Xiongnu did not know about Emperor Han as the ruler of the world, and they tortured people. Therefore, General Lu Bu deserves a special award for solving such a difficult problem. Therefore, the general now becomes the prefect of the Shufan command post. The general did not expect that he would be given such a high position. He was still on his knees and expressed gratitude. His men were also surprised that the general had a position, and not just a position, but a real position. Jia Shu said that the general has now become a district judge. The soldiers were incredibly happy about this appointment. They raised their hands in the air and praised the general and his new position. The general held this order tightly and was extremely serious. The story moves to the administrative region of Shufan, which is also considered a prefecture and is much larger than Linrong County, where there is a military police force. Even though the population has not reached 10,000, this place is still called a prefecture, and it receives the allowance that is necessary to support 10,000 people. This is due to the fact that the place was considered very dangerous. There were regular raids here. Only Lu Bu was not afraid of any of this, because he had already managed to defeat thousands of soldiers. Because of this, The entire attention of the Tang dynasty soldiers was focused on the fact that their general was given a high position. Everyone had a lot of fun and was really happy. This place had a lot of meat and drinks, and some dishes were constantly being prepared. Everything seemed to be done for the benefit of the army. But what did Jia Shu and the eunuch think about this? They tried to maintain discipline, but in what way? Qin Yilu came to Jia Shu at his request. When he arrived, the first thing he had to do was bow to the eunuch. The general also wanted to bow. Jia Shu asked Qin Yilu how much money does the camp have. He asked why this question was asked. But looking at the faces of those present, he understood why this question was asked. He said there is not enough money right now. Recently, there was preparation for battle. Therefore, not even 5 silver taels can be found. But Jia Shu said that this amount would be enough. Let Qin Yilu bring all the money he has here, and he must do it as quickly as possible. Qin Yilu had to carry out the order. He brought what was required of him. Jia Shu apologized to the eunuch and asked for forgiveness for the poor quality, since the coins were delivered from a military base. Jia Shu spoke about supply problems. Only supplies are delivered to them. But the eunuch assured him that there was nothing wrong with it. In addition, he has not asked for something that he himself cannot get. Jia Shu assured that he would not even dare to ask for it. If the general receives a gift or payment, he will definitely repay the debt. The eunuch said that Jia Shu received the surname from Tao Xiong and is now the eunuch of his clan. Jia Shu thought that he could very well belong to him. Jia Shu assured that he did not know that the general would be given such a position. The eunuch was surprised. He was sure that the general had simply bought it. Does Jia Shu himself really believe this? Jia Shu bowed his head and said, "Spies from the north often appear in Sanju. All the judges who were in this area were killed. They were skinned and hung on the castle gates. The eunuch found it funny that someone would be willing to torture others in order to gain a position. He then turned to Jia Shu and said that he had entrusted him with the position, but he still gave him his things. Jia Shu assured that everything was fine. He is only upset that the eunuch and his people had to travel a long distance, and they did not even provide them with decent housing. The eunuch asked Jia Shu. It turns out that he carried out the order of Commander Shu Fan, but at the same time he was not close to him. The eunuch admitted that he was quite young, but a talented and dedicated soldier like her would not be able to appear in Luoyang in the future. The eunuch wished good luck to Jia Shu, and he looked and thought that the eunuch turned out to be not as simple as he initially seemed. People continued to have fun. They played musical instruments and danced. The general noticed that Qin Yilu was clearly worried about something and asked what was wrong with him. Qin Yilu said no, nothing bothers him, but the general felt that something was wrong and invited him to tell him what was happening. He will be happy to listen. Qin Yilu looked at him and asked if it was true. If so, he became bolder and expressed his request. He would like to ask for an assistant. The general looked at him in surprise. And Qin Yilu continued that he would not like to ask for a reduction in the load, he simply can't handle it himself anymore. But the general was sure of the opposite. He believed that Qin Yilu could handle everything very well himself, so he did not understand why he needed an assistant. Yes, and there is no one. But Qin Yilu had a ready answer to this question. He pointed at Master Zhu. You only have to look at him to understand that he is gifted with intelligence. The general said that he could not give Mr. Xiu a military post, and Master Zhu will be able to be responsible for the soldiers. Qin Yilu was surprised, because these things should be handled by an armed general. And the master doesn't even look like an armed soldier. The general answered because he is responsible. The master was simply tired of being at his beck and call all the time. And the voiced proposal is much more pleasant than just sitting at a desk and waving a sword. Then Master Zhu decided to demonstrate how strong he was. He took off his clothes and exposed his muscles. His body was simply amazing. People looked at him and were simply in admiration. Some even wanted to touch him. The general ordered the soldiers to move away from the master. Meanwhile, Zhang He pointed his pike at Human. He was sure that people here were having fun with something they shouldn't have, and Human was also involved in this. Human put his hand forward and asked Zhang He to stop. He just wanted to talk and nothing more. But Zhang He stopped this attempt. He is ready to talk to Human if he stops approaching him. Human exclaimed he only wanted to talk for one reason, Zhang. He is new here. But then, Li Xuan intervened in the conversation. He said that the conversation was a bad idea, because Human was a Xiongnu, whom Zhang He really disliked. Human did not like this intervention. He grabbed Li Xuan by the chest and said that he was clearly seeking death. But Li Xuan was not at a loss in this situation. He called Human unworthy of him, and if anyone would die first, it would be Human. The general heard the altercation. He said there is always tension between them. Therefore, Li Xuan is not in a position to say that. The general exclaimed that instead of fighting, it would be better if they exercised properly. One of the soldiers approached the general and reminded him that it was time for training. All soldiers were ordered to go here. The meeting place was the flag. In the morning, the eunuch who brought the order moved back. Jiashu told Lu Bu about the conversation with the eunuch. He heard a new name for himself, Commander Shu Fan. Jiashu was surprised that the general had not heard anything about him, but it was true. Jiashu said it was all done by some powerful person. But it was unlikely that it was Ding Yuan. It turns out that while they were talking, Chu Sun was outside all the time. She wanted to tell the general something, so Jiashu called her. The first thing she asked was whether what she heard was true. The general confirmed that yes. And Chu Song decided to share the good news. She finally found the one she had been looking for a long time. Chen Lian was very helpful in the search. She finally caught the trail of Master Boji. The general looked at her with great amazement. Very soon, world chaos will come and the era of rulers will come. The world will be divided into parts and everyone will fight for the new ruler of the entire universe. Only the most powerful will win. They said that they were simply sent from heaven. The general ordered Chen Lian and Wei Yue to be called to him. He said that it is known where the person who disappeared after the amnesty is located. To find it, you need to find time. They must do everything possible to find Kaiyong Boji. The news that Lu Bu had become prefect of Shufang also reached the administration in Binzhou. The news also quickly spread that he had gained power. It was in the order of things that news about the perfect spread at warp speed. Naturally, this news reached the teacher and master. Therefore, the second demanded from the first an answer to the question of how it happened that Lu Bu became a prefect. The Lord didn't just ask, he shouted. The teacher sat and lamented to himself that the ruler learned this news much faster than the teacher thought. The teacher didn't understand what the problem was. But the ruler believed that before making such decisions, it was necessary to first consult with him. The teacher, unexpectedly for the ruler, burst out laughing. He reminded him that up to this point, he had always done everything himself. But the ruler believed that this situation was different. But the teacher believed that everything was in the habit of things, and he didn't do anything ridiculous. But the overlord again began to accuse the teacher that his actions were impulsive, and he provoked the Shufang magistrate. After all, it was the teacher who suggested the person to Lu Bu. The teacher objected that he simply shared his own opinion and that in fact it did not mean anything. But the ruler still believed that he had done the wrong thing. He didn't understand why he did it at all. Does the teacher really believe in Lu Bu's talent? But the teacher just thought so. He thought that Lu Bu had the skills of a great warrior and was very talented. But then why doesn't the teacher allow Lu Bu to be kept with the master? The teacher replied that if the ruler continues in the same spirit, then Lu Bu will have a completely different end. And all because the ruler is afraid of Lu Bu and is trying to set him up. He's afraid that sooner or later, he will become more powerful than himself. Therefore, if Lu Bu is under the control of the overlord, everything will go awry. The teacher really doesn't want all this. The Lord took everything said as an insult, so he ordered the teacher to leave. The teacher asked if he left, would the Lord really be better off? He said that he has many people to replace him. But if the teacher leaves, it will be forever. He has no plans to return. The Lord took these words for fear. As a result, the debaters turned their backs to each other and stood in silence. The teacher was about to leave, but then the overlord called out to him. He said if he apologizes, he will forget the situation. However, the teacher was the person who does not deviate from his decisions, so he turned around and left. Finally, the ruler threatened to take away everything that had already been offered, but the teacher didn't care. The overlord can do whatever he wants, but he will never be able to prohibit the residents from supporting Lu Bu. All these words offended the ruler, and he hastened to write a new order. He wrote a document, called one of the soldiers, and asked the scroll to be delivered to Taishu. And the soldier must rewrite the second document and post it everywhere. Taishu sat in his castle and studied the document sent. He believed that the sender knew that Professor Kai Yun Boji was here. And in the second letter about payments, there was information that they would not be able to pay for what needed to be fixed. He looked and didn't understand what to do. They want the castle walls to be repaired, but are not ready to give money for this. He, of course, will try to figure it all out, but there is one more problem. He couldn't just leave with Kai Yun Boji. Trying to kill someone like him is dangerous. He thought that nothing would work out just like that unless chance helped. The general was in Machi's castle packing his things when one of his men came to him. He was holding a letter in his hands. He handed it to the general and asked him to read it. The document was sent by a friend in Xia province. Most likely something will happen soon. The general looked questioningly, but said nothing. Now the action has moved to the area next to the Lubu Castle. Qin Yilu commanded that a place for the carts be urgently found. They have to leave today, so everything needs to be done quickly. The general's men stood and assessed the amount of work ahead. There was really a lot of it. They'll have to remove the big bags soon. Fortunately, there weren't too many of them, so all the actions wouldn't take much time. Zhao Yun asked the others to take their time and wait a little. Hu Man did not like this commanding tone. Zhao Yun was clearly younger than him, so there was no way he could become a commander. A verbal altercation began between them. Zhao Yun noticed that he received the position a little earlier, so his status is clearly higher, but one of the soldiers who stood and watched all this said that they always look at skills. Hu Man considered himself older and more experienced, but Zhao Yun took all his statements as a challenge to fight, because this is the only way to determine who is stronger. Zhang Liao, who watched all this, said that he did not care about the differences, but he is ready to beat anyone who shows cruelty. Hu Man did not like that someone was interfering in his affairs. Perhaps Zhang Liao thinks he is very strong because he is taller than them. He grabbed him by the collar of his clothes, but Zhang Liao also did not like this treatment. He said if Hu Man didn't let him go, he would cut off his head. The verbal altercation threatened to turn into a real fight. Zhang He and Zhao Yun watched from side to side. Next to them was Chu Song. She really didn't like it when people started quarreling. Therefore, she threateningly asked Hu Man and Zhang Liao about their showdown, and if they don't stop, she'll tell her big brother everything. Hu Man cleverly got out of the situation. He patted Zhang Liao and said that he was just straightening his clothes. There was no fight, and in general, they never fight. Chu Song said that people are afraid when they start fighting. Zhang He stood and thought about Chu Song, so she found herself alone in a company of men, but everyone liked her. Moreover, she always manages to calm the warring parties. Who is she really? Maybe Chu Sung is the general's secret daughter? Or maybe he's just attracted to little girls. The general's men stood and talked about their affairs. Suddenly they heard some noise, but could not determine where it was coming from. Maybe they dropped something and need to check it. The noise came from the general's chambers. He clenched his fist and hit the log with great force so that it broke in half. The general asked the messenger where he received the letter. He replied that it was Diokin's personal request, and they asked for it themselves. A friend from Xia province sent this information to all provinces and then forwarded it to them. The general crumpled the letter and asked again whether it had been sent to all provinces. And then he revealed information about its contents. It said that competitions would be held to identify the strongest soldier, and they will have to fight the general himself to defeat him. The general was very angry at this news. He shouted, "How dare they? They will immediately head to Binzhou itself to see the inspector. Therefore, we need to get ready to go." Chu Song decided to stop the general. She said she didn't understand what the problem was, but it obviously wouldn't help. Lu Bu stopped and thought for a few seconds. He accepted that Chu Sung was right. He realized that his visit to the inspector could not change anything, but it could worsen the situation. Sung Ryong was surprised to notice that the general somehow quickly calmed down, which was not typical for him. He usually always goes crazy for a few days. The general said that we need to finish loading, and then they will still visit the one they wanted. Chu Song asked to take her with him. People were ordered to rest and clean up. They will have to go first. The general's soldiers were quite strange. They didn't seem to show respect for each other, but it was noticeable. They understood that if they were cold towards each other, it would not end well. Master Zhu wondered if he could join this company. Yes, he had a good tongue, but can he use his skills wisely? The master peered into the sky and saw a fourth star on it. The general Chu Song and Jia Shu were talking. It was strange that Ding Yuan would do such a thing. The general did not understand what was strange about his action, but they tried to explain to him. Everyone knew that Ding Yuan was very jealous of the general. He believed that there should not be another hero like him. Chu Song assured that there was no need to worry about this, and the general did not understand why. She said that Ding Yuan would try to find a warrior who would be stronger than the general, but he is not at all afraid of this. The general confirmed that of course not. Chu Song continued, and since the general himself is not afraid of anyone, then there is no reason to worry. The general smiled at her and said that of course she was right. He will only need to defeat everyone who dares to oppose him. Suddenly, a voice was heard near the entrance to the general's chambers. It belonged to Ding Yuan. The general asked what he was doing at such a late hour and then invited him to enter. The man who entered reported that he had seen a fourth star. The general realized that Ding Yuan sees the signs that the stars send, and he asked me to explain to him what this means. While observing the sky and stars, you can see a lot of unusual things. In this situation, the fourth star means the castle and its walls. The sky is trying to give a hint. Chusong thought about what she heard. And then she exclaimed, "If we talk about the walls and the castle, we need to remember Sir Bag. Perhaps he is currently in Zhang Castle. If so, then she is one step closer to solving the mystery of his disappearance. However, this is not enough, and we still need to think about it." Ding Yuan also said that he saw two more stars in the sky. One means night, the second means someone was pulled into something and got the better of him. Ding Yuan thought that maybe Sir was deceived by the woman, so he couldn't escape. Jia Shu exclaimed that no. He then apologized for interrupting and was asked to continue. Jia Shu noted that the signs in the sky hinted at the Gyeomsan Mountains, and given these positions, Kai Yunbojie could easily be in the northern mountains, and most likely right now he is in danger. The blacksmith sat and carefully examined the sword. He thought that such a weapon was simply unlucky because its owner did not underestimate it. Oh, how he didn't want to melt it down, and he shouldn't have allowed this to happen, but now, it's all in the past. The blacksmith carefully studied the handle of this weapon. Suddenly he noticed something very important. He immediately ran to look for Chusong. The general did not like the fact that someone broke into his chambers so early. But the blacksmith said that this was very important. Chusong woke up from screams and did not understand what was happening. The blacksmith handed her what he found on the hilt of the sword and asked her to take a look. He admitted that he had not yet started melting down the sword. Chusong asked them to be quiet. She began to read the message she had brought. It was written in it. In order to rise as the sun that illuminates the world, the king will have to overcome many obstacles. The blacksmith asked what these lines could mean, but Chusong didn't know the answer. The general, picking his nose, said that all this was complete nonsense, and the sword needs to be melted down, since it is useless. And in fact, the old man just woke up Chusong. The next day, in the vicinity of Shufang, the general met with his people, who gathered everyone for the competition. The general first ordered everyone to be divided into groups. There is a necessary and obvious reason. There are rivals who are already quite tired. Most likely the big-eared bastard is just lying. He simply asked for his duties. Dongzhou was also involved in the search for Kai Yunbojie. But why is he doing this? Perhaps he needed something else. And now Chusong is looking for him too. I wouldn't like to, but she'll have to come to terms with her plans. The general gave the order to remove everyone from Shufang, and those who remained must follow the general. The area is simply very large, and you need to be careful to find the right color. The general said that they would definitely find Kai Yunbojie. A few weeks later, active work was carried out to strengthen the wall. The old people had to work hard. They were dragging stones. Not everyone could stand this work. One of the old men stumbled and fell, which the soldier did not like. When he fell, he was seriously hurt, but the soldier, like a blind man, did not see this and thought that he was simply imitating the patient. He took out his whip and began to beat the unfortunate man. He demanded that he obey the order, but the old man simply couldn't do it. Another man tried to stop the soldier. Such excessive cruelty was clearly unnecessary. A person can be easily killed. He leaned over the unfortunate man and asked if he was okay. He saw that the man was in too bad a condition. He called for help. But people looked at this whole situation with indifference, and no one tried to help. The man was simply begging for help, but then the one who fell woke up and said that he was okay. Such indifference was incomprehensible. The man asked why everyone stopped caring about each other. This scene was observed by unknown masked people. The soldier shouted that the work had to be finished. People silently lined up and moved, only one separated from this crowd. He walked along the path and approached the edge of the mountain. He stopped and began to look at the sky. It was beautiful. He did everything the master wanted. The stars crossed the universe. According to predictions, they should renounce it and begin to shine. But I didn't want it that way. Suddenly he heard footsteps behind him. He turned and stared at the unknown guest. He asked who he was and why he had come. Maybe he needs his life. Or he was here to hear a few poetic lines. Let him tell you what he needs. But it was the general. He greeted Kai Yunbojie. He said that his name was Lu Bu, and it was a great honor to meet him. He is now responsible for the Shufang region. Kai Yunbojie asked why he came here. Since he found him, he probably wants to take his life. The general assured that this was absolutely not the case. Kai Yunbojie said that if he did not come to kill, it was better for him to leave. He looked up at the sky again and said that the heavens were telling him that he did not have long to live. The general replied that he had come for his help. The general said he wanted to know what heaven was telling him. Kai Yunbojie shouted why and why he was asking for this. The general replied that he knew this. World chaos will soon come. Many of his people began to feel something, such as Jia Shu. He doesn't know how to read the messages, but he feels them. Everything is not going the way it should be. The king stopped listening, And the fact that he sent Kai Yunbojie here clearly speaks to this. Kai Yunbojie became angry and demanded to stop. The general has no right to insult the king. The general concluded that Kai Yunbojie and the king were very similar. Previously, Kai Yunbojie was offended by the king, but now he came to his defense. Kai Yunbojie asked, how can he not protect him? The general said that he actually abandoned him. But Kai Yunbojie did not perceive it that way. The general was very disappointed that he had spent so much time searching. He really regrets looking for someone like Kai Yunbojie, and now he will leave. The general heard how something began to look for the gentleman. He was about to follow the voice. But Kai Yunbojie stopped him and said that he would sort it out. And people were already searching for Kai Yunbojie, armed with torches. They started asking where he had been, and then said that Taishu was waiting for him at the meeting.